We are live.
Morning, everybody. Welcome to a joint hearing between House Human Services Committee and the House Education Committee, hosted in the House Education Committee room. This is February 7th, 2024. And the topic today is after-school programming, after-school, how the whole after-school system works. Just so folks on the Human Service, the two chairs, we will just start briefly to talk about kind of after school in each of our worlds. So for folks in human services, you're going to hear probably references to 21C that refers to an after school program run by AOE, funded by federal dollars, called the 21st Century Community Learning Centers Program. It's been around for a couple of decades. And that is sort of the main program that AOE runs in the after-school space.
Good morning. My name is Teresa Wood. I'm chair of the House Human Services Committee, and thank you for welcoming us to Room 9. When you hear about after school in the human services realm, you'll hear about CCFAT, Child Care Financial Assistance Program. You'll hear about things from the Department for Children and Families, which is where the after school supports and services and regulations all live within the Child Development Division. So I think with that, we're ready to get started.
We've got a full day of testimony. So committee members, we're going to group testimony, and then sort of at the end of each group is when we'll be doing questions. So Jason, we're ready for you. Our first grouping is mostly about school-based after-school programs, and I think probably most of them funded through 21C. Jason, if you'd introduce yourself, and we're very happy to have you here and welcome your testimony.
Thank you. I'm Jason DiGiulio. I'm principal of Hazen Union School in Hardwick, Vermont. And I was recently here talking about the community schools efforts in Hardwick, representing the community schools program. And hearing about the efforts for universal after school moved us to speak in this context. So last year, we understand the legislature approved a budget allocating funds for after school and summer learning programs that are funded through the Education Fund. Despite the governor's request to redirect these funds to private organizations and programs, the House rejected that change. So presently, the governor and external organizations persist in urging the Vermont Senate to amend the Budget Adjustment Act, enabling direct grants to their organizations. In the context of Hazen Union School, we are a small rural community school in Hardwick, Vermont. And it's essential to understand our commitment to service and responsibility to our community and our students. Hazen is often the last resort for vulnerable children and community members, and has been providing crucial supports and enrichment through soon to expire federal funds. These funds, essential for maintaining quality education and access to opportunities, cannot be easily absorbed by local funds, especially given the circumstances and context and the penalties imposed by the common level of appraisal landscape. Despite the integration and efforts to operate beyond the school day, such initiatives incur costs, and as we are a public school, we cannot charge fees like private entities. Public schools are dedicated to ensuring that even the most vulnerable children receive a high-quality education and access to resources and opportunities without being contingent on personal wealth. We don't select who we serve. When the floods come, our gym opens. When the food is scarce, we open our food pantry. When folks need it, if we have the means, we help. Our communities lean on our school to help boost them when they need it. These challenges are increased by our rural nature and Hazen's communities being in between everyone else's service areas. So the excitement surrounding Act 78's potential to provide after-school programming has some concerns for us. There has been rhetoric offered that mischaracterizes Hazen and other public schools' experiences among other schools as being unwilling or unable to provide quality after-school programming. The reality, though, is that the state has not provided us with the opportunity or the means to do so. Hazen Union School has consistently seized every opportunity that we've had through federal funds and had great success doing it. We are currently trying to build an after-school program with our community schools grant, but these funds end at the end of the year. Hazen Union School supports everyone without discrimination. We partner with community and state organizations. We work with entities like the Generator to provide unique opportunities for our students. We work with the Craftsbury Outdoor Center, the Highland Center for the Arts, the Civic Standard, and many other groups locally and statewide to give our students as much time, care, and attention that our budget, transportation, and distance will allow. While doing so, we account for everything. We diligently collect report data, we include demographic information to identify the needs, and we ensure that each public dollar is accounted for and that each student outcome is reached. And if it's not, we figure out why and try to get there. So I'm deeply concerned as a head of a public school in the Northeast Kingdom that the advisory committee and the advice it gave was generated by a group with a severe lack of representation from the education folks, the people actually doing the work in the field. I see 3 of the members represent public schools and many, many that do not. I see that last year, the landscape was further confused from a public education point of view. I see that we spent $99.4 million from the Public Education Fund on out-of-state and private schools, and 71% of those schools got more money per student in tuition than Hazen is allowed to get. I cannot charge more as I am a public school, which by statute is an organization dedicated to public good and community trust. Enabling more diversion of education fund money to private and non-school organizations adds to the draining effect on the already stretched education fund. Additionally, more frustration arises from Hazen needing to contemplate budget cuts and potential program endings in the face of the common level of appraisal and the landscape that has been presented to us at this tax time. Changes to the pupil weighting formula stand to help Hazen immensely in educating and caring for the vulnerable rural students in a veritable resource desert that we experience. Hazen was poised to have more interventionists and help to give students a chance to achieve what their better resource peers have access to. Now, you are being lobbied to move education fund monies away from that into non-school entities, further complicating the CLA education fund complication. You've heard previously about our successes and our progress in trying to become a community school, and the current proposal as it stands now, despite the fact that it might look good and support all students, really takes away and endangers that plan. Thank you.
Thank you, Jason. And as I said, we'll be doing questions at the end of this grouping, so if you could stick around that.
Jason, I see you have written testimony. If you could submit your written testimony so we have it for the record, that would be wonderful.
Sure, will do.
Thank you.
All right, Mark Tucker on screen, you're next. Welcome.
We can't hear you.
Is that better?
Yes.
Sorry about that. Too many microphones. So I'm Mark Tucker, Superintendent for Caledonia Central SU, serving 7 schools in Caledonia County and northeastern Washington County. Thank you for the opportunity to speak to you today regarding the removal of after-school funds from the Education Fund to the General Fund as part of the Budget Adjustment Act. Let me simply state up front that after-school programs should be connected to public schools both programmatically and through funding ties for the following reasons. One, the operative word in the phrase after-school funding is school. In CCSU, we have an established history of providing robust after-school and summer programming across all 7 schools. Our programs are not child care programs. They all have an educational or educational enrichment element to them. This happens because we are in the education business.
Mark?
Yes?
People are saying they're having a difficult time hearing you. Can you get a little bit closer to your microphone?
Yeah, let me see if I can. Is this better?
Oh,
Yeah.
much better. Yeah.
Is it too much? Too much, I can turn it down. Okay, sorry about that.
Yes.
You want me to go back to the beginning?
I think why don't you? Yeah.
Okay. So I'll skip the introduction. The operative word in the phrase after-school funding is school. In CCSU, we have an established history of providing robust after-school and summer programming across all 7 schools. Our programs are not child care programs. They all have an educational or educational enrichment element to them. This happens because we are in the education business. Education fund money should be used for education, not child care. Two, moving education fund money to private sector control will undoubtedly have three results. First, it will eliminate the expectation that these programs have an educational component to them, raising the possibility that at least some of this money will be used to operate what are essentially childcare programs. Second, redirecting state money to private organizations creates opportunities for these organizations to discriminate against our students in any of the ways that some private organizations discriminate today. Finally, it has its most negative impact on the rural school districts by diluting the pool of available students for our programming. If families of means are able to move their child or children into a private program, schools in our, excuse me?
Oh, that was just a sneeze. Go ahead.
If families of means are able to move their children into a private program, schools in our region will be drawing from a reduced pool of students. Our experience is that when this happens, the schools end up providing services to the special needs students and the students whose families cannot take advantage of opportunities beyond the bounds of their local school. This is a fundamental equity issue for these students. Three, this money was only recently added to the education fund in the last legislative session, ironically due in part to advocacy by some of the same organizations that now ask to have that money moved to the general fund. The wise decision by the legislature last session to make more monies available for after-school programming by adding tax revenue to the education fund ought to be seen as an acknowledgement. The public schools know best how to utilize those monies to serve their students. We are just now seeing an opportunity to access these dollars through a competitive grant process that AOE has announced, with a caveat that the grant program will go away if the dollars go away. My point is that there has been no time for the schools to demonstrate their good intentions and proper use of these dollars. Thus, any claim that we do not know how to do this are specious at best. Four, I know that some people are tired of hearing the word equity. Nonetheless, public schools are the only organized bodies in Vermont that can ensure that public dollars are used for their intended purpose without fearing that schools will fail to address the needs of all of their respective students, regardless of financial needs, student ability, race, sex, gender, etc. If we fail at any of these goals, there is an opportunity to challenge that failure because there are oversight guidelines in place to do so. To my knowledge, there is no one positioned to oversee the use of these dollars in terms of meeting state mandated non-discrimination laws and regulations outside of the public school system. Five, there's an implicit risk that if you put this money in the hands of private organizations, it will naturally flow to those organizations that already exist. On its face, that may not seem to be a problem, but what usually happens in these cases is an overconcentration or overdistribution of these dollars away from rural sections of the state towards the more populated regions where we see the clustering of widely available competing programs that can partner with public schools. In the Northeast Kingdom, there is a dearth of such organizations. No YMCAs, no Boys and Girls Clubs, etc. Our friends in Chittenden County can probably point to the availability of organizations such as these, but there is no reason to believe that these organizations will use any of this money to expand into unserved areas of the state. If I'm right, and I think I am, this reallocation of monies will simply exacerbate the gap between the haves and have-nots. Six, we are not opposed to the notion that a public school might wish to partner with an outside organization to serve the after-school needs of its students. In our mind, the question boils down to who should oversee these agreements. In my experience, the best way to control behavior in the public sector is to control the money. Leaving the money in the hands of the LEAs will not prevent partnerships. It will simply mean that the LEA has a voice in how these organizations serve our students. Case in point, Peacham School has for several years partnered with a private facility in St. Johnsbury to operate its after-school program. The school provides a space and the private firm provides the staffing at a predictable contracted cost. Where necessary, because we control the money, we can exercise some authority over how the program operates for the benefit of Peacham students. The arrangement works for both parties. Seven, all the schools that I serve have benefited from ESSER money for the past 3 years to operate their respective after-school programs. In FY25, we have moved the cost of these programs into local district budgets. In a couple of cases, the impact of doing this led to some teeth gnashing in the face of other inflationary pressures on the local budgets, but ultimately the boards all came down on the side of meeting its student needs. We have been looking forward to the opportunity to compete for this after-school money to provide relief to the local budgets in FY25 and beyond. Losing this opportunity now will present a challenge for future funding of our programs at a local level. And with the chair's permission, I'd like to add a comment that's not in my written testimony, because there was a mention of the 21C program. I don't know how many districts and SUs are 21C eligible. CCSU intended for the past 2 years to apply for a 21C grant to support our after-school programming starting next year, following exhaustion of the ESSER funds. We were discouraged by AOE from filing an SU-wide 21C grant and encouraged to only apply for one of the 7 schools. I only mention this because 21C is not a funding option for CCSU next year. Finally, and perhaps most importantly, our communities expect after-school programming to be available at their school. Many of our families participate in this free programming because it is convenient. The kids are already at school, and the program staff are typically school staff who already know the kids. Given the geographic dispersion of my SU, there is zero chance that private organizations can or will stand up after-school programs that will serve my students. There is no one better suited to managing resources for after-school programming than LEAs. The continual efforts by advocacy groups to take money from the education fund may have distinct purposes, but what they all have in common is to continue the assault on public dollars raised through education property taxes or designated to the education fund from other sources to serve the needs of students in public schools. This is bad public policy writ large, and I implore you not to make this next sad example of that assault on public education. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mark Tucker. Samantha Stevens and Beth Chambers are next. Welcome, and we look forward to your testimony.
Thanks for having us today. My name is Samantha Stevens. I'm glad to be back with the House Ed Committee and excited to speak with Human Services today. I'm the Community Schools Coordinator for the North Country Supervisory Union, and I'm here to share the story of how the NCSU Encore after-school program impacted the development of expanded and enriched community engagement work in our community schools program, and also to set the stage for Beth Chambers, our Encore coordinator, to speak about dedicated after-school work and how the proposed adjustments could impact our community. When the RFP for community schools occurred, it was the height of the pandemic in 2021. In the context of that crisis, with the vulnerabilities of our rural, high poverty, medically complex community at the height of mind, we created a vision for the NCSU proposal that relied on some really heavy leveraging of existing strengths. We looked to the aspects of our supervisory union work that was emulating the characteristics that we hope to foster through community schools, the programs that were most nimble and responsive, most equitable, and most capable of sustaining relationships of belonging and support for students and families through what we all feared would become the most challenging period of teaching and learning that we had ever experienced as professionals. One of the most obvious examples of nimble, equitable, and sustaining structures in our SU was and continues to be the Encore after-school program. Even in the spring of 2020, Encore, under Beth Chambers' leadership, made a quick pivot to provide dynamic childcare available to school and medical staff so that parents could continue to show up for the students or their patients during the day. It was one of the few programs at the community level that continued to open its doors during that time. Concurrently, Beth and her staff planned for the return of in-person learning, and with it, in-person after-school programming. And concurrently to that, Beth worked with our learning design director to simultaneously launch an internal NCSU virtual learning option for students who could not return to the classroom in 2020. Incredible work done for the benefit of another population of students whose learning and health might otherwise have been at risk. And it included virtual after-school clubs for kids. In September of 2020, not only did NCSU schools all return to in-person learning, so did all of our Encore after-school programs. It happened because of two things: Encore's incredible commitment to our students and their families, and their constant communication with families, school leaders, and the Department of Health, all of which was required to ensure that it could be done safely. That kind of connection only thrives in programming that is truly embedded, invested, and engaged in its community. It is from and for its community, and in rural areas, it has become a particularly rare and still critical key to student success. As mentioned, our NCSU Community Schools pilot was developed in 2021 after Encore had accomplished all of that. With community schools funding, we found a new opportunity for collaboration between my work, which was formerly titled Equity and Community Outreach, where the integration of social services contributes to equitable access for all learners, and the Encore program. Our two offices were engaged in parallel work at that time, making academic success possible by supporting schools to do work that's not traditionally included in the domain of public school. We were resourcing families to help meet basic needs through community engagement and providing high-quality, enriching after-school care. Clearly, NCSU Community Schools didn't need to build an after-school program, and we didn't need to focus on making it better. What we did need to do was to leverage the incredible community resource that was the existing model and build it out in ways that would advance two primary goals. One, to engage and strengthen the community as a whole, the community that our students come from and return to each day. And two, to ensure that the development of our new programs for students and their families would result in increased access to safe, equitable, and inclusive environments, both within and outside our school buildings. Through the NCSU Community Schools investment in collaborative programming with Encore, we have worked together to plan and implement expansion of programming that is building a foundation for recovery, not only for our students, but for their families and the community at large. We have endeavored to build the missing piece in many of our students' lives, a resilient and connected community. Some of this work is presented in tandem, like our youth GSA and middle school leadership groups that meet on Saturdays throughout the year to decrease the isolation of students growing up in rural, sparsely populated areas where it can be hard to find other youth who share the same concerns, hopes, and ambitions. In other areas, NCSU Community Schools has taken inspiration from Encore's model of expanded and enriched learning opportunities and turned these goals into dynamic evening education programming. Mobile Community STEAM and Van Gogh Art Night series invite folks of all ages to lean in and explore science, technology, engineering, art, and math, or engage in arts and crafts making activities together. These programs exist one night per week for 5 weeks in one location and then relocate to the next stop on the map so that a new group of people can be invited in for the same engaging activities. We feed people at these events. We make it as easy as possible for them to come join us, have a good time, and get to know each other and their school system in a new way. And when it's over, we ask them to help us make it better so that when we launch again the next year, they can see how much we value their presence, their participation, and the fact that they bothered to tell us what they think. We are seeing as many as 55 attendees per night at these events, and every participant who has provided feedback says that the programming absolutely fills the need for community learning and engagement, and they wish it was available every week. This is the kind of programming that Encore does so well for our children when their parents and caregivers are at work in the afternoon hours and summertime. And as it turns out, it's the kind of programming that our community also desperately needs to help rebuild the social bonds that began to diminish even before COVID and made us more vulnerable during and after it. In a place like the North Country Supervisory Union, not many entities are as well situated to offer this holistic approach to school. In a place like this, the school has to be a one-stop shop for basic needs connections, after-school care and enrichment, mental health services, transportation and coordination for medical and dental appointments, access to laundry services, etc. Because if we don't, the absence of those things will result in lost opportunities for learning and diminished academic success. When a population relies on school to do all of these things, the most valuable way to transform the relationship from dependency to collective efficacy is to build community resilience through social connection. It's a good thing that COVID forced us into that state of thinking, because we were right. We have entered what will likely be a long period of challenge, and we are doing a better job of being there for our students, their families, and our community because of it. Thank you.
Thank you, Sam. I'll add on a little bit about the after-school program. So I am the coordinator. I'm Beth of Encore Programs, and we're in our 20th year of the CC 21 CCLC program, which is very exciting. We've just applied for our 5th 5-year grant cycle. Last year, 1,048 students K through 8 attended Encore programs, which is 65% of our elementary school population. 25% of our attendees were on an IEP or 504, 61% qualified for free and reduced lunch, and only 56% of the families donated towards the program. It is a free program with a suggested donation, and no tracking is included to make sure that it is accessible for families. Equity and access is always at the center of what we do, as well as high quality programming. So some examples of programming that we offer are martial arts, dance, theater, sports, junior chef, STEM, literacy, newspaper, youth councils. And we've recently put together 3 bike trailers that travel from school to school, use both school day and after school, with 40 bikes each and all the safety equipment. We've piloted a mobile woodworking lab that moves from school to school with enough workbenches, wood, everything needed for up to 16 kids at a time, again, used both during the school and after school. And all of this is really possible because of the community partnerships that we already have in place with folks like Umbrella, Siskin, Northwood Stewardship Center, North Country Career Center, Green Mountain Farm to School, and the NEK Outfitters and Guide Service, Teach America to Swim, the Old Stone House. We really are part of a cohesive system here in the NEK that leverages all of our local groups. We also have 150 staff that work per year, 11 site coordinators. 67% of our staff are school day employees who really know and care about the kids and have the same training that the school day provides. We have 25 high schoolers that work in our programs that are through the NCUHS Flexible Pathways program, so they're getting school credit and pay working after school. Enrollment did not take a hit during the pandemic, as Sam was touching on, and in some places it increased because of childcare's closing. We were a vital part of the NCSU recovery plan, especially that first summer in 2020 when we were figuring out what school classrooms could look like and how masking would work out for kids. Our intention is to be an enrichment program, and that's not untrue. But if you ask families that we serve, many will tell you that Encore, a great option, is their only option in the area after school. This has prompted us to change focus over the last couple of years and remove our set fees, buy vans to bring youth home after school for whom transportation would be a barrier, add to the registrations for families to indicate if programming on a day is a want or need. And still, when a waiting list is necessary, there are families who are struggling to get by. Partnering with Sam in the NCSU Community Schools Department as both a thought partner and a program partner has really revolutionized the way our programs think about supporting families and making sure that community is at the forefront of everything we do. Staffing continues to be a challenge. We are seeing more and more students who need one-on-one support, behavior support, nursing support, and we're really trying to fill those needs. We've increased wages to try and keep up with the local market. We continue to be a fun and flexible place to work, but that can be really challenging. Post-ESSER, funding is going to be challenging, and with threats both to our local budgets, whether or not they'll be passed, and Title I and Title IV risks of decreases, we are generally worried about funding and trying to find ways to sustain another 20 years. So all leaders across North Country Supervisory Union are cohesively engaged in making sure that the after-school and summer programs are successful. As a member of the 21 CCLC director cohort, as well as having served a term last year as a national after-school ambassador, I can tell you that programs that are successful take a community to support. And I feel really lucky, as Sam mentioned, and proud to be part of a community that is doing that work. And I see and hear plenty of programs, both in our state and around the country, that do not have those same embedded systems of support, which causes director turnover and programs to fall apart. On that note, I'd like to share some thoughts about the Act 78 funds that are being allocated and expand extended day learning opportunities. In my opinion, the first priority should be schools and communities that do not have programming, as they have embedded policies and procedures that will ensure the access and equity, and that is a priority for youth. I also see the merits of other organizations having access to funding sources that increase opportunities for kids through partnerships with schools who may not have the capacity to take the lead on grant writing and program development, but who have identified student needs that would otherwise go unmet. An example from the Northeast Kingdom that is happening right now is a group that was pulled together to try and create a teen center, which we're calling the Hive. An action group made of local educators, human services, NECA, youth community members, and police was created at the end of last summer to engage in the creation of a teen center, which is badly needed in the Newport area. This group worked together to create a name, choose an area for the center to run, create an advisory structure, and vote on the lead organization, which was decided to be Northeast Kingdom Community Action, NECA, a group with experience building teen centers, serving rural communities, and writing grants. Although the high school principal and many of us from the education field were fully in favor of a teen center, we did not feel it was within our capacity and scope to take the lead on it. NECA is a nonprofit organization encouraging many stakeholders to be part of decision-making, and I would fully support them applying for these funds without oversight from the North Country Supervisory Union, but with robust, equity-focused oversight from a grants manager at the state level, much like I received from Emmanuel from the Agency of Education, who has been a steady leader over my 8 years, and I know to hold programs accountable to the interest of the grant. Similarly, our local libraries and education centers like Siskin and Northwoods would be groups that could make their programming more affordable and have systems in place to ensure that safety, equity, and access are at the forefront of their applications. I want to see out-of-school opportunities for kids increase, and I don't think that all schools have the capacity to manage and oversee the funds for other organizations. I know that if we at NCSU need to apply for and manage the funds for the teen center, it will be difficult to find a person to do that for NECA. I believe the legislation should be as clear as possible that the funds will go to programs that can prove safety, access, and equity, that they are in an area where other programming is at capacity or doesn't exist, and that they are applying with the support of community leaders. Those elements are addressed in the RFP, which I've read through and is robust, but should be addressed by the legislation as well to ensure that the long-term intention of the funding source as a community, equity, and access-driven source is maintained. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Matt Dubois is next.
And just a reminder for folks to please submit your written testimony to committee assistants. That would be wonderful.
Great. Welcome, Matt. Thanks for making the trip.
Just barely made it. I had walk and roll this morning, so it's winter walk and roll day at Virgins Union Elementary School, so it's colder than I anticipated, so thanks for having me. So I'm here to talk a little bit about Virgins Union Elementary School, our after-school programs, our efforts to include community, and I set a timer, so I read ahead 10 minutes, so I'll try and keep my remarks to that time allotment. So I am Matt DeBlois, as I said earlier. I'm the principal of Virgins Union Elementary School. It is my 8th year as the principal at the elementary school in Virgins, and I've been in our school district for 23 years. So same school district. So we currently serve 300 students, and we have programming that lasts for about 48 weeks throughout the year in our school after school program and summer programming. We will have programming in 2 weeks through our winter break. We'll still have kids in the building. The same thing is true in April, and we offer around 7 weeks in the summer. And that is a combination of childcare, because we are a registered childcare site at the pre-K and elementary school level. We offer 21C programming, which I think you just heard from NCSU, so I'm not going to go into too many details about that. But we are the only school district in the state that is pre-K through 12 21C site in all of our buildings. So Ferrisburg Central School, the pre-K, which is cited at Ferrisburg Central School, VUES, Virgins Union Elementary School, and the middle and high school, which is across the field from where I am. We offer robust programming throughout the year that is student-centered and student-focused and really builds in equity elements. and includes opportunities for students to design some of their own programming, as well as to implement their programming with support from adults. We have site office or site coordinators at in each of our buildings, some of which are part-time, many of which are part-time because we don't have capacity thereafter. But it really brings in a lot of opportunities from the school, reflects the needs of the school, and is able to work in concert with the school. So those partnerships really allow us to have access to students who are in need, whether those are historically marginalized or whether there are opportunities that we have not realized that our student wants. And so that programming really builds upon what we have identified through our comprehensive needs assessment, through our continuous improvement planning, and all lines up to have a collaborative conversation. And through our 21C work and our community schools work, we're able to build on a coalition of folks throughout our community, including, but not limited to, the Boys and Girls Club of Greater Virgins, the Bixby Library, which serves all 5 towns of our school district. The Virgins Partnership was a community organization of businesses, as well as other organizations like the Lake Champlain Maritime Museum. So there's currently some programming at Ferrisburgh Central School that brings some programming into the building through the Maritime Museum. So these kind of community partnerships, as well as regular meetings and collaboration, make sure that we're not creating any gaps and making sure that we're not being redundant in our programming offerings, and ensures that kids and families have the opportunities to engage in robust programming that supports all learners. And so we also have a lot of partnership with Virgins Recreation, which is a city organization, and we have memorandums of understanding. So like tonight is Wednesday, right? So adult basketball at Virgins Union Elementary School, 7:30 to 9. Anybody's welcome to play. So I've tried. I don't recommend it if you're out of shape. I ended up guarding a 24-year-old, which I think I'm 24 in my head and I'm not in my body. So I think it's incumbent upon us as a state to make sure that education dollars are spent in ways that are equitable, and that we ensure that those who we identified, those historically marginalized populations, those students in need, are working with this, or getting their needs met with the support of the school, whether that's in partnership with the school or whether that's through the school directly. So we work really hard in Virgins and the Greater Virgins community to ensure that we're working with our community partners to make opportunities available. And those opportunities exist in myriad ways. Chess club is a simple thing. We also try to bring all of our sports in-house and make sure that they're equitable as well. So we have 49% of our K through 12 population is participating in winter sports through our school system. We have programming 4 days a week at least, and today is a half day early release day, so we'll offer childcare for families, and that's opt-in, pay fee for service, whereas 21C programming and all their after-school programming is sliding scale. I assume you know what sliding scale means, so I'm not going to go into that too much. So we also try to make sure that within the focus that we highlight programs that students are interested in and build those from within. For example, my personal children went to Ferrisburgh Central School and got interested in Vermont History Day. It was started by a teacher, not started by a teacher, but like a teacher spurred that on at FCS. We have since built that to be a community-wide, like district-wide programming. So like Thursday afternoons, students are bused to our building from Ferrisburgh. They participate with students that walk over from the high school, and they participate in History Day together. It's a 5 through kind of 12 continuum. And we're really trying to make sure that we offer as robust opportunities as we can and make sure that we meet the needs of all of our students and support them regardless of their ability, disability, et cetera. And we really want to offer a continuity of service. So at our dismissal at school, we don't just ring the bell and all the kids leave at the same time. Our first bell has all the kids leave that are walking or being picked up by an adult. Our second one is for Fusion, which is the name of our after-school programming, as well as for our childcare. So our childcare runs, like I said, about 48 weeks a year. And then our last bell is for buses. So we really try to get as many kids as possible. Like I said, this is my 8th year. Around my 3rd or 4th year in the summer, we were trying to think of like, will we get to 100 kids in our summer programming, which is offered for students who have finished kindergarten and are coming back for 6th grade. We used to talk about 100 being like a great number, and we've been hovering around 200. So we serve about 200 kids through our school-based summer programming, and that programming really allows us to mash a bunch of different things. So we offer special ed services through IDEAB for extended school year services, concurrently with students who we've identified through our multi-tiered system of support that might need some extra support in either math or reading or some other form of literacy as well, some social emotional needs that they might have to continue that going and build on some groups for there and do and complete some other like recreational programming and tie that in. So kids come into our building, they eat, they participate in programming. Some of them know what they're doing in terms of like the academic services, and some of them just go with the flow. But we're able to offer summer services in a way that meets the needs of our community as well as meets the needs of all of our students in many ways, whether through extension or support. My timer did go off on my wrist, so I know that I'm coming close to time, but I do want to impart on the committee that I think it's in all students' best interest that the money flow through schools in some way, shape, or form, so that we can work with community partners and build those community relationships together. Because I think, frankly, we can most functionally work collaboratively rather than separately and compete against each other. We've tried that in Virgins before, and it hasn't worked as effectively as working together to make sure that we're on the same page, we're not offering redundant programming, and that we're all supporting the needs of all the students in our community. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Matt. Appreciate the travel over here. Neil Odell, you are up next. We welcome you on Zoom.
Thanks very much and for the opportunity to testify this morning. My name is Neil Odell, and I am a school board member in Norwich, Vermont, serving on both the Norwich School Board and the Dresden Interstate School Board. And I reviewed Wednesday's discussion of after-school funding that occurred in the Senate Health and Welfare Committee. And in that meeting, Chair Lyons made a comment that I thought was very pertinent for this conversation. She said, "We can always improve on what we have." Well, that's why I'm here today. I'm hoping that we can improve on what we have, or at the very least, prevent what we have from going in the wrong direction. What is the right way to control and monitor the flow of after-school program money? Should it remain in the education fund and be distributed through the LEAs, or should it be pulled out to a special fund and be routed directly to private providers? In attempting to answer that question, I believe we'd be well served to consider the current challenges with our education funding system, especially in the wake of Carson versus Macon. And there are many challenges. Things like equitable funding, separate and unequal systems of accountability and transparency, anti-discrimination challenges, public money flowing to religious schools. These all stem from previous decisions that we have made. You are currently facing some of the very same decisions when it comes to funding of after-school programs. And I worry that if you make the same choices, if you pull dollars into a separate fund and set up yet another set of accountability and transparency rules, that you'll run into the same issues. You'll spend countless years in lawsuits, and this body will spend years wrangling over changes to a system that could have been better from the start. Privatization in education has resulted in equity challenges, and the same holds true for after-school programs. Federal court decisions prevent Vermont from imposing our non-discrimination statutes, the same ones that apply to public schools, on private entities if those entities claim the anti-discrimination laws are inconsistent with their religious expression. Private providers are not required to serve all kids. They can choose who they serve. This is not theoretical. There are currently licensed after-school programs that have left LGBTQ status out of their anti-discrimination requirements. And moving the after-school money out of the education fund exacerbates this problem. When money flows from the education fund through LEAs, it comes with accountability and transparency requirements. Public schools are required to serve every student. However, if the money was moved to a special fund and no longer distributed through LEAs, these protections are eroded. This point has been confirmed by Emily Simmons, General Counsel for the Agency of Education. When asked if entities funded from a special fund would be required to adhere to Vermont's anti-discrimination statutes, she stated, private and nonprofit and for-profit programs funded out of the proposed after-school and extended learning special fund are required to follow the Vermont Public Accommodations Act to the extent of, where applicable, those entities' exercise of their own constitutional rights. Put another way, if the private provider feels that any of the anti-discrimination requirements violate their freedom of religious expression, they don't need to follow them. I'm also worried that we're not being mindful of our own Constitution. Article 3, sometimes referred to as our compelled support clause, states that all persons have a natural and unalienable right to worship Almighty God according to the dictates of their own consciences and understandings, as in their opinion shall be regulated by the word of God, and that no person ought to, or of right can be compelled to attend any religious worship, or erect or support any place of worship, or maintain any minister contrary to the dictates of conscience. This isn't trivial. It's a foundational value of our state. The direction that we are potentially headed with after-school funding and our education system is in direct conflict with our own Constitution. We cannot be sending public taxpayer dollars to any program, after school or otherwise, that openly discriminate against our children, and it's clear that simply requiring entities to comply with Vermont's Public Accommodations Act is insufficient. By keeping the money in the education fund, we utilize the structures and a framework already in place to guard against the potential abuse of taxpayer money. It's clear to me that a large portion of the legislature strongly supports anti-discrimination. Just a couple of days ago, many of you signed on to a letter in support of Vermont's LGBTQ+ community. You wrote that you are profoundly concerned with the recent surge in hate crimes targeting the LGBTQ+ community. You now have the opportunity to use that concern in your lawmaking role. You can keep after-school funds in the education fund where they are protected. This, in turn, will make sure that our LGBTQ+ community and others are protected from discrimination in after-school care. Every kid deserves this. We owe it to them. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We now have about 10 minutes available for questions. Is Jason still here? Did we lose Jason? Okay. Maybe Mark, or I'm not sure who up there could talk about 21C. I was just curious as to if you are doing a 21C funded after-school program or summer program, are you allowed to charge tuition? I heard it mentioned of a sliding scale, but I also heard somebody say because it's 21C, no tuition is charged.
I can share on that. You have to write a letter to get approval to have any kind of charge. So for instance, a licensed after-school program that is also a 21C program that receives subsidy can charge families so that families who most need it are provided the subsidy or free programming. But you do have to write a letter yearly to get approval to have any kind of charge, and that includes donations. So I have a suggested donation of $25 every 8 weeks. And that is 5 days a week. So $25 to support basically supplies and field trip funds. But we are not required, no one is required to pay. So 21C programs insist that no one be required to pay in order to attend, but there are programs who do charge with approval federally.
I have a follow-up question and that is, if you are a 21C funded program that is operated by the school at the school, do you have AHS or CDD oversight as well?
Some do and some don't. You can apply to be a licensed, and then that's an additional sustainability funding source. It is challenging to both be a 21C and CDD licensed program because the licensing really follows childcare's. And so you have a lot of additional tasks when you are both 21C and licensed. My programs, for instance, are not licensed, but are 21C.
Matt Watt?
We have both. So kids literally sign out of one program into another. So those CDD sponsored ones are fee for service and subsidy eligible, whereas 21C are pay what you can, if you want.
So, thank you. I have a question. I think it was Mr. Tucker that spoke about the after-school programs requirement for an educational component. And I was just wondering if you could elaborate a little bit more on that. Who requires that? Is that, are there AOE regulations or rules around that? Or is that a local requirement?
That's a local requirement. We've purposely tried not to run programs that are just an opportunity for kids to stay in the school building and run amok. And I'm not going to tell you that, you know, if we have kids there for 2 hours every day after school, I'm not going to tell you that all they're doing is schoolwork. But there is a component of, for some of the kids that stay, they might be working with somebody on, you know, skill development or skill reinforcement. In some cases, some of our students are on IEPs, and that's an opportunity to get some enrichment around that. And then the activities, other activities that go on, we always look at, you know, what is the opportunity for kids to learn something doing this activity in the after school program that we can't fit in during the school day. And then there's you know, but then there's always an element, to be honest, that, you know, for some families, it's like they don't have a place for their kids to go. Between 3 o'clock and 5 o'clock when they get out of work. And so they are there. The motivation for the families is, I know my kids are at the school for a couple more hours, they're safe. I can pick them up at 5 o'clock when I get out of work, and I don't have to worry about where they are. And just to, you know, drill down on the point of, I don't have another place to send kids for after school programming because there aren't programs nearby, and if there were, the cost to transport kids to another town like to St. Johnsbury for a program there would make it unaffordable, and frankly our families wouldn't, I don't think, would support the idea that, you know, you're going to bus my kids to St. Johnsbury and then bring them back, or how are you going to get them home? It's just, you know, the rurality always you know, is an issue for us out here in the Northeast Kingdom.
Thank you. Thank you.
I'll add to Mark that it is also a required part of the 21C grant. So every 5 years, you do have to talk about the educational enrichment that will be offered and how it is consistent with the school day and part of school plans. And then you have to report on it yearly to the Agency of Education as well.
Thank you. And then I just, first off, I really appreciate hearing from everyone this morning about the quality of the programs and services that they are providing to children and families. And I think that's what everybody here wants, is to have more of those opportunities available for children and families. So I really appreciate the concentration on hearing about what you're doing in your local communities. One of the things that you know, resonated with me that I heard people talk about is the the collaboration and the coordination and the sort of community component and partnerships that it developed. And I'm just looking at the criteria, and it's for these, potential grants. And one of the absolute criteria is the coordination with the local education agency. So that seems to be something that's a high priority for these funds. Other than, I guess, local policies, or is anybody who's testified this morning aware of any state rules on after school at the Agency of Education? And maybe I'd wait for that with Acting Secretary Boucher.
Maybe
Yeah,
just wait for
okay.
that.
Okay, that's it for me.
Committees, members, questions? Representative Brady, we'll go
Why don't we do your committee first and then
Okay.
my committee?
Representative
Okay.
Brady and then Representative Austin and then Representative Gregoire.
Mark, can you speak a little bit more to, and maybe Samantha as well, but in your testimony, you talk about sort of one of the challenges of moving the education fund money where it is now to a special fund is 2C in your testimony, but the negative impact on rural schools by diluting the pool of available students for our programming. And if families of means are able to move their children into a private program, presumably also provide transportation, then the schools have a reduced pool and often a pool of higher needs students. And I'm wondering if you can just explain a little bit more what's going on in your region or talk about that a little more, because I think that's a concern for many of us in the education committee about education writ large, that is happening in rural parts of our state and also exacerbating the cost of our education fund. So if you could just speak to it a little bit more, since we have you here and you have deep expertise in this.
Well, were you asking me, Representative Brady?
Yes, you
Yeah.
or Samantha, and others who can speak from that rural perspective, but I know it's in your testimony, so.
So quickly, I would say that comment was speculative because we don't currently have a situation where I have programs surrounding my supervisory union where parents might take their kids for after school programming. What I'm concerned about is the possibility that, if the logical place in my SU to stand up new or additional programming would either be in St. Johnsbury or in Barry, Montpelier. We don't have relationships with programs in those areas other than contracting to bring people into our after school programming. Like Fairbanks Museum will come to our schools and do enrichment activities in our after school programs, just for example. But it would be the idea that if this additional money meant that now there's a new program available in St. Johnsbury, not to pick on St. Johnsbury, but there's a new program, and I've got some families of it. Oh, great! I have the ability to transport my kids to St. Johnsbury every afternoon for a program. That's going to be a very small subset of the students and the families in my communities. And there, in terms of the reducing the available students, there's a certain level of overhead that you have to comply with. We run licensed programs in all 7 of our schools. We have certain, staffing requirements, and there are some fixed costs involved in operating an after-school program that are the same whether you have 10 kids staying or 30 kids staying for an after-school program. And my schools are obviously smaller than some of the others that you're hearing from. So, and what we always run into in terms of kids moving to other opportunities is it's always the kids and the families that have the particular financial ability to move them somewhere else. And what we end up with is the kids that can't have nowhere else to go. And we're happy to continue to serve those kids, but it's just, that was more speculative. I don't understand why we can't continue to run our programs and bring resources in that meet the needs of the students in our particular schools, as opposed to, letting that money go somewhere else. That's where I was coming from.
Yeah, appreciate that.
Representative Austin?
Yep, so this is for Mark or Neil. I'm wondering, is there any opportunity for kids to get their homework done after school, let's say if a teacher was compensated to have some kind of homework space. Because I imagine when they get home at 5, people are tired, people are trying to get dinner on the table, and then it might be harder in the evening. I'm wondering, is there an academic tie to, after school to support kids? Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I can't quantify it for you off the top of my head, but that does go on. When I go into the schools in the late afternoon, I will sometimes see a few kids sitting in the cafeteria working on homework, because and there's an adult generally not necessarily a teacher, although we do have teachers that work in our after school programs, but somebody there to support them, keep them on task, ask, I don't understand how to do this arithmetic problem. Can you show me? And somebody will step in and help them. It's not formalized in the sense of an after school homework club. But if we had a student staying for after school that said, I want to do my homework now because when I get home, I have to play Fortnite, we would support that. And we would allow them to do it at school.
All nine NCSU programs do have an intentional homework component. Sometimes that's shorter, sometimes it's longer. We shoot for 25 minutes in conjunction with kind of a recess, snack, and then homework help period. And it is largely staffed by paraprofessionals from the school day. When we can get teachers to work after school, we fit in tutoring whenever possible. And during the summer program, we have had for the last 3 years with ESSER supported funds, intentional small group tutoring for the first 2 hours of every day of the summer program. And that is highly encouraged by the 21C program RFP. There are specific questions about how you are addressing academic need and homework help and after school.
Thank you.
Representative Gregoire.
Yeah, originally I had a question or comment, so I was trying to figure out how to do the question, but can anybody speak to, at the end of the day, in education or as a society, our goal or what it's about is children, right? It's not really about us. It's not about the teachers. I was a public school transfer director, not about the schools, but isn't it about the students? So, wouldn't it be? What is your opinion on this issue that more opportunities we provide to the students, no matter where they're getting it, and to their families? Wouldn't that be better for the students?
Could you direct your question, Representative Gopar?
Well, anybody that wants to talk about it.
Okay.
Multiple people had opinions on this, so I wanted to pass it by. Like, isn't it?
Look, I'm not going to sit here and argue against the notion that more services are going to be better for our kids. The problem is that in the rural parts of the state, there is nobody to stand up programs to provide those services. So, if there was something, if I had any assurance that this money was going to be spent to create additional programs that serve my dispersed supervisory union, I might have a different opinion about redirecting that money. But right now, what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to run after school programs that were previously we did a lot of work to take advantage of federal grant money to stand those programs up. They existed in some schools, not all schools when I came on board in 2019. They all have those programs now. We wanted to we expected to be able to apply for, and we're likely to get a 21C grant. And as I said in my amended testimony, we were discouraged from applying for all 7 schools and told, now just focus your application on one of the 7 schools. So we've had to scramble and go back to the local district boards to fund these programs. I think we would have a good chance of getting some of this money through the AOE grant process because we've gotten pretty good at writing meaningful grants. But if you take the money away, the agency has already said that those grant opportunities are going to go away. So it's really about where the money is going to be directed and whether or not we are better suited. I'm speaking from my rural supervisory union. I know this is not the same for everybody, but where we are sitting right now, we are in the best position to leverage that money to take advantage of, or not take advantage of, but to provide an increased range of opportunities for our kids.
The request for proposals includes 3 absolute priorities. One is community and school partnerships. One is supporting historically marginalized youth, and one is being in areas that are underrepresented with after-school programming. And those are the priorities in the RFP, and I think that they're really thoughtful priorities. My worry about it being moved to a separate fund is that over time, those priorities get watered down or shifted because of the groups that are applying for the funding. I think if the legislation follows the RFP and is very clear about the intentions of the fund over a long period of time, that we would see more programming happening for kids that is following the same type of quality that is happening in schools. I do see groups here in the Northeast, in our area of the Northeast Kingdom that would use these funds, like our local libraries, I think in thoughtful ways, like NECA with the Teen Center. I can see these as programs that we need, that the schools do not have capacity to take on in the same way that these other groups might. But I hear all of the worries from the other people who have spoken that that we don't know how that request for proposals could change over time if it's moved out of education. It's complicated because I do want to see more programming for kids, and I don't think that Encore needs to be the only game in town. We could handle, we have waiting lists at several of our sites. I want families to have a lot of options, and I do want them to be accessible and equitable like we are required to be and the way that we really believe in. So I think it's less of a matter, or I mean, maybe it's still a big matter, but it's not so much where the funds are, it's making sure that the legislation is going to ensure that the funds are supporting kids in the same way that schools already are. It is my opinion.
Jessica's next.
Representative Brumsted and then Representative Stone.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, chairs. I, as a member of the Human Services, and can you hear me okay? I'm sort of off in the little corner, so. As a member of the Human Services, I'm not as familiar with the LEAs. I'm guessing from all I'm hearing, both here and in our building, that it's similar to a school district. And so.
Just to be clear, LEA is the federal term for a school district.
For a school, okay, that's great. And so I'm curious if the LEAs have a mechanism to talk to each other, to learn from each other, an ability to collect data that is comparable in some ways across the state, so that we can learn from, I mean, this was very exciting to hear all that's going on throughout Vermont. And I think when you think of the Agency of Education as being able to pull that kind of information together and help everyone learn. So I just wondered, is that something that the LEAs have opportunity to do? And does that happen now on other programs? And we just finished talking about banning all flavors, and we want to make sure that everybody has opportunities to similar cessation programs. So it's more of a general question.
Yeah, I'd love to jump in. So as a 21C director, I'm part of a cohort of other 21C directors in the state. So anyone who has that grant, there's about 30 of us, is required to meet monthly with a manual from the Agency of Education. We also engage in peer reviews every year. So I was in the Burlington School District visiting after school programs and doing interviews across their central office and visiting schools last week. It's a robust program in which 21C directors are set up as mentors for new leaders. It is one of the closest groups of folks that I work with. I see Heather on this call. We're together at least monthly and communicating all of the time and sharing and gathering information to support each other.
Thank you. We're going to be real quick here. Last question before we move on to the next testimony goes to Representative Toof. One more after that?
Yeah.
Okay.
I represent.
Yeah.
I represent.
All right, thank you, Chair, and thank you everyone for your testimony today. I just have a quick question. And it's maybe for us to just, Act 76 we passed last year, was about $100 million payroll tax. I may be wrong with these numbers, so I won't get on that. That money with the intent, it's right on the first page, the intent is to go to increase access and the quality of childcare services and after school and summer care programs throughout the state. Now, that money is about 100 million. I think we're talking with this after-school money is about 3 million of cannabis money. Do we have any like misgivings, or should there be as much scrutiny on that money that's coming out of that fund that we're gonna be raising, that's gonna be coming out July this year, versus this money right now that's very, compared to about 3% of what that other number is gonna be? Should that be under a scrutiny as much as this is right now? I guess my question. I don't know if that's maybe a rhetorical question, or if anyone can answer that.
It may be a little challenging because that's childcare dollars. And we're talking, so
Yeah, and
we mostly have public school.
Yeah, and with that, it says after school, and actually after school is mentioned about 14 times in our legislation.
Yeah,
I think that's.
we're gonna have the deputy commissioner from the Child Development Division on, so she'll be able to answer that question for you, Representative.
Yeah, thank you.
Representative Stone.
Yes, I was wondering if y'all could speak about how your programs ensure access for all kids. I'm thinking like transportation or adherence to IDEA, which I heard in the Senate testimony yesterday that private providers are not governed by the same laws to adhere to IDEA. So I was just wondering, and I know that there are definitely, we're in active litigation with a number of schools that have anti-discrimination clauses, but are intentionally leaving certain parts out, like gender identity and whatnot. So I'm wondering, it kind of touches on what you were talking about, Neil, and then just in general, like how do your programs ensure that you are adhering to things like IDEA and providing transportation?
Go ahead, Mark.
Yeah, so my response to that is when I look at our programs in our schools, these are our kids. They are with us from, 7:45 in the morning until 3 or whatever, when the school day ends anyway. We have long before anybody told us we had to do that, we developed, practices and procedures around non-discrimination, gender identity, et cetera, before anybody said that was what the world was moving towards. The only time that we take signups for our after-school programming up to the capacity of. There's two things that may restrict us from a capacity perspective. One is the ability to hire enough staff for the number of students that we have that want to participate. And that's partly tied to the fact that we run licensed programs through CDD, and there are guidelines in there about staff to student ratios. And the second part of that is that those same regulations also put restrictions on the spaces that we can use based on a certain, and don't ask me the specifics, but X amount of square feet per student, and there are certain spaces that we can use in our buildings and certain spaces that we cannot. So a lot of this is tied to the licensing requirements, and I don't want anybody in human services to hear that as, I'm not taking a shot at CDD, it's just the world that we live in. We've chosen to operate licensed programs. So, but in terms of, if anything, we bend over backwards to make sure that we're not excluding or discriminating against our kids on IEPs, our kids based on, family need and things like that. We are not, to my knowledge, this year turning kids away in any of our programs. That we've been able to staff up to sufficient levels to meet the needs or demands for student participation. That wasn't true in the previous 3 years during the height of the COVID pandemic. It was really hard to get people to work and after school, and in a couple of cases we had to shut the programs down because we couldn't staff them. But it's in our DNA in the public school system not to discriminate against kids and to be sensitive to our highest needs kids and to accommodate them. So I can't speak specifically to issues with private programs other than to say, I think you're absolutely right when you say that private programs are not obliged to comply with IDEA, outside programs. To my knowledge, they're not, but that's based on, anecdotal evidence because I don't have private programs to test that theory against, but my belief is that IDEA it applies to schools and it doesn't apply to private programs that are not schools, independent or public schools.
Thank you. In the spirit of time, I think we'll move on to our next round of testimony. And Chair Wood, if you'd take over.
Sure, and we are not going to be taking a break because we have a lot of people to hear from. So any folks who need to take a personal break, feel free to do so. Thank you. Okay, we are going to hear from Heather Moore next. There she is. Welcome, the floor is yours. Thank you for being here.
Awesome, thank you. And can you hear me all right?
Yes, we can, thank you.
Perfect. Yeah, thank you for the opportunity to speak. I've been part of expanded after-school access for several years. Back in 2021, I had the great pleasure of being part of the task force for universal after-school access as a representative from the field of after-school. Through this task force, I supported the authorship of a document that was used to guide the creation of the state after-school grant that was released last month. I had been anticipating the release of this grant for so long that I literally jumped for joy. Not only have I been hoping for this grant to support community efforts for the youth in my community, I was proud to be part of the change that allowed other communities to feel the hope of providing youth positive opportunities for socialization and to engage in meaningful activities outside of school. But then my spirit felt crushed when I learned that the money was tied to the state education fund and therefore not available to organizations outside of LEAs. The idea behind this grant was to expand access to allowing communities to decide for themselves how best to support their young people. Sometimes that expanded access lies outside of the public school system, and we should not block organizations that are trying to be part of positive change from accessing these funds. Schools do so many wonderful things for young people and for the community. My experience in 21st CCLC programs has given me the most heartwarming memories of connections between youth, families, schools, and the community. And personally, these funds could go a long way in supporting the 8 programs that I oversee, as we will be losing some of our funds once we run out of our BESSER funds. However, keeping these funds tied to money meant for public education system runs counter to the expansion of programming and equity and access. There are many reasons public schools cannot and should not be the only organization allowed to host after-school activities. For many rural communities, schools have been the sole organization responsible for out-of-school time for young people. This inherently creates limitations on flexible opportunities for young people due to continued ties to the school as an institution. No matter how amazing a school is, for some youth, their personalities or life experiences make them crave out-of-school opportunities that have no connection with sitting in a classroom or their grades, or whether or not what they do in their leisure time will affect their school day time. They should be able to have a choice to leave the school and venture into their community and be made to feel that they belong there. Excuse me. Not only are some young going to refuse access to after-school-based programs or school-based after-school programs, limiting the intention of expanding access, having schools be the sole provider for youth learning, engagement, and development has a negative impact on the social welfare of a community. It's important for the health of the students, families, and the community as a whole for community organizations to hold responsibility for supporting the well-being of young people. When this responsibility is not shared, it creates silos between members of the community. Excuse me a second. Oh, pardon me. When this responsibility is not shared, it creates silos between members of the community without children and those with, which often leads to misunderstandings and even prejudices. It also creates a culture of us versus them, with young people not feeling connected or valued within their community. Older people often blame young people for misdoings or make assumptions that they don't care. These things aren't true. It's just that young people are essentially outcast from their society when they aren't on the school's campus. Some major effects of this include lack of community involvement when young people become old enough to vote and join local boards or committees. There is substantial research that also shows a strong correlation between lack of community involvement with a sense of belonging and substance misuse. All of this was understood by the task force when we met to discuss the need to provide a grant opportunity to expand access to young people. I understand that there is concern around access and equity of programs that are community-based and not structured and legally bound in the same way as public schools, but the grant process is meant to make sure these organizations do adhere to these crucial practices of equity. I would also like to share a personal story of why this is so important to me. I have been an after-school professional for 14 years. I'm a member of the Franklin and Grand Isle Regional Prevention Network, the FGI Prevention Collaborative, the Vermont Community Foundation, and I am the community lead for the Vermont Youth Project in Enosburg and Richford. I have successfully written over $1 million in grants to help fund out-of-school programs. However, in 5 years of seeking grants, I keep falling short on funding a youth center in either Enosburg or Richford. These two communities have vibrant 21C programs. On any given day, you will see 30 to 80 middle and high school youth engaging in high-quality programming in the school buildings. And on those same days, you will find just as many middle and high school youth searching their communities for a place where they can find a sense of belonging. And the sad truth is that substance misuse and mental health challenges are both on the rise. The solution isn't programming at our schools or solely at our schools, but a place out in the world where they can be seen and heard as individuals in the towns that they call home. As a trustee for the Village of Enosburg Falls, I've been able to work with my fellow board members and village staff to find a way that the village can oversee a youth center. We have a youth council made up of 5 Enosburg middle and high school youth who can help advise the center, and we are working with students from the Human Services program at our local tech center to assist in building a center that meets the specific needs of the area youth. We are working with organizations such as Outright Vermont, Franklin County Caring Communities, and Vermont Student Anti-Racism Network to make sure that this space is inclusive and welcoming to all. The center currently has a small grant from the Vermont Children's Trust Foundation and from the United Way. The center plans to offer mentoring programs, community outreach, cooking classes, gaming with other low-structure socialization, so that youth will have the opportunity to hang out with peers and supportive adults in a variety of ways. It took 5 years to get here, but the money is not enough to sustain a center. The issue with finding funds isn't a matter of grant writing skills, quality proposal, partnerships, or the ability to manage funds. It's the fact that this center is being organized and overseen by a municipality, not a school district or a 501c3 organization. Therefore, this project doesn't qualify for most grants, especially the larger grants that allow for enough funds for staff and volunteers to spend time making a great center and less time being concerned about paying rent in 3 months. The knowledge that this grant was going to be released this year brought hope to the village board that we might be successful in our application. For our community, the LEAPS 21st Century program cannot expand access to all youth all year. It's beyond the program's capacity. But a youth center would not only provide a service that meets the needs of youth who don't participate in LEAPS, it would also provide programming when LEAPS is not in session. This sort of partnership would do exactly what the task force had in mind and what the grant application is meant for. It would expand access and build equity and services for a community in need. I urge you to support changes in the funding system to create a special fund that would allow non-LEAs to apply for the grant. It would give the youth of Northern Vermont and other communities a chance to go to programs that meet their needs. I agree that funding this grant process should not put a burden on the education system. This expanded access opportunity should be funded in a way that schools and community organizations can work together to apply in ways that work best for their communities. Our young people depend on it. Thank you.
Thank you, Heather. Appreciate your comments. Next, we're going to hear from Megan, and Megan, I'm going to butcher the last name, Liciardi, and Deb Whitkus.
Hi.
Did I get halfway right? Probably not.
Close, yeah, it's Liciardi. It was a good
Oh,
attempt.
okay.
Thank you.
All right, welcome to both of you.
Yeah, thank you for hearing us. I would like to start by just explaining a little bit about the program I'm coming from. I have the great honor of co-facilitating and directing a program called Friends for Change in Southern Vermont. We're in Bellows Falls. And we are a nonprofit, we're a program out of a nonprofit called Youth Services in collaboration with HCRS. And Friends for Change was created initially for and by historically marginalized youth and their families. They pulled together after the closure of the Boys and Girls Club and said, this is what our community needs, and this is what we needed to look like. And so we continue to just design our programming with those youth and families, and being in a third space specifically allows us for the flexibility to adapt and respond to the needs of our community and those youth in like real time. And we are in collaboration and partnership with our school system. However, we get to function as our own entity.
What's wonderful about that relationship, first and foremost, it goes back many years, and it's complementary, it's collaborative, and we leverage resources We actually, because we have this wonderful partnership and the independence, we're actually saving tax dollars because we get to bring in therapists to be with our youth that they cannot necessarily be part of the school day. The wonderful thing about Friends for Change also is, having talked to the WNESU and their equity, been a member in their equity committee. It's really clear that our kids, because they are coming from historically marginalized families, that they don't necessarily feel safe or seen or supported in schools typically. And that is I know our school district is doing amazing work on equity, and there still is unintentional harm, and so they're least likely to show up at the after school programs. And so we work on that. We do mutual referrals. So those kids who fall through the cracks, who aren't ready to participate in school-based after school programs, they come to us where they thrive and they are equally engaged and empowered. We'd like to share a story about one of our youth who attended Friends for Change. So I'm going to pass to Meg.
Yeah, so we had a middle school girl who was referred by her aunt to us to come spend time with us. And she was coming from a historically marginalized family, and both of her parents were in active addiction. DCF was involved, and she and her sibling ended up in the care of her grandfather. And while the school knew about a lot of that and was really showing up in beautiful ways for this family, there's a lot of shame and stigma about those things in our communities. It's just a fact. And by building a program for and by youth and families who are experiencing those things, we're building a place where those kids feel safe to come, even when really hard stuff is happening at home. Also, even though the WNESU is doing their best around transportation, it is hard to provide transportation home for every single different after school program. And so that becomes a huge barrier. And so if you're just a single grandpa trying to take care of multiple kids and you're in an unexpected time, it's difficult if you have to be able to pick everybody up. Third spaces allow for kids like that to access after school programming when otherwise they wouldn't. We have kids who show up after being suspended. There might be a really good reason they got suspended. They still should have an after school place to go. We know that 3 to 6 in the afternoon is sort of the hot time of day when kids are the most likely to get in trouble or be victimized or end up, vandalizing the local pool. So if instead you have somewhere to go where you're building productive factors, you're building positive connections, both with your peers and adults, where you're building better community connections. We bring these kids out to community events and we say hey, our kids are cool too. That doesn't get to happen in an after school setting if you were just suspended. And there's also just different expectations for the LEA, what they need and are prioritizing for after school programming is important, but it's not always what our kids need. And so if we had to go through the LEA to get our funding, we would then have to be designing our programming based off of the expectations of the LEA instead of the expectations and the needs of our kids in our community.
The other thing we really are able to do well is our staff are representative in many ways of the youth we serve. So when kids come to Friends for Change, they feel a sense of belonging and they see staff who look like them, who've had similar shared experiences, which really helps them to open up and it really reduces the stigma and shame. So we can hire without lots of bureaucracy, staff with lived experience and lived expertise. The one thing I just wanted to touch upon is our data. Because I think it is when we're making decisions, it is so important to see what the data says. So for us, we actually look in the mirror. How are we doing with serving historically marginalized youth? So we track BIPOC data demographics. food insecurity, housing instability, LGBTQ, if kids are on IEPs or 504s, and we also track DCF involvement. Because of the program that we run, the creativity, the excuse me, ingenuity, you know what I mean? Because of how creative our program is designed and we respond to the needs of our kids, our data speaks to the fact that we have incredibly meaningful representation. 34% of our youth identify as BIPOC compared to countywide, which is 16%. 91% of our youth report food insecurity and our housing and face housing instability. A high percentage of our youth are on IEPs and 504s, and a very high percentage of our youth are in have DCF involvement. So we know we are reaching in real representative ways the kids, the most marginalized kids for which this funding was intended. And that's why I think our data is showing that we're doing and we have designed a program where they are showing up. And we're not just serving them, we're empowering them. We use a 2-generation approach because we learned from our kids that their families are really important. And that dad or parent who might be in active addiction, I actually love them. And maybe they've been there for me, you know, in other ways that they can't, you know, right now. So we've actually been able to connect families to, you know, our local recovery center. We've got families in recovery now, entire families, because we could be innovative and we can respond to what we learned from our kids, because they are the ones who inform our strategies. They are the ones who help us to write our grants. We center their vision and voices for what serving them looks like, what a transformative after-school program looks like. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you both for being here today. And I didn't mention this to Heather either, but if you have any written comments, it would be wonderful if you could send them in to our committee assistants so that we have them for the record. I would appreciate that very much. Next, we're going to hear from Maureen Gillard. Hi, welcome.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for being here.
My name is Maureen Gillard. I'm the school-age childcare director for Essex Junction Recreation and Parks. Essex Junction Recreation Parks, or EJRP, is a municipal department within the city of Essex Junction. We provide all of the licensed after-school and full-day summer camp programming for the Essex Westford School District, or EWSD, which serves approximately 4,500 preschool through 12th grade students across 3 communities: Essex Town, Essex Junction, and Westford. Our after-school programming, known as Rec Kids, serves K-5 students, and there are 411 individual participants currently enrolled in our programs across 8 sites. We provide full-day programming during most school vacation days for students in grades K-6 with up to 150 available spots for care. And we operate 5 full-day summer camps, 7:30 to 5:30 Monday through Friday, that support 425 campers each day for incoming 1st through 9th graders. We have a longstanding and close working partnership with the EWSD, which is a critical component of our success, particularly in regards to our 8 shared staff members who work within their school communities during the day and shift gears to run the after-school sites in the afternoon. This unique model provides consistent relationships, continuity, and expectations from school to after school and into the summer. It allows us to hire highly qualified staff as full-time year-round employees to fill these important roles. We're also able to provide connection and communication with the school and family teams around additional support for students, including behavior plans and positive behavior supports and interventions. Our model works effectively because the district is able to focus on all of the needs associated with school day learning, while entrusting us with the great responsibility of providing the invaluable resource of after-school care, which for us is a space for enrichment and extended learning, social growth and development, relationship building, and in my opinion, most importantly, fun. We have the sole management of funds, staffing, design, and programming, and we do have a strong layer of support as needed. While we are a municipal department, our entire budget falls within the enterprise fund. So it's essentially self-supported programming, which is supported by the participants of the programs. We access grant funding to keep up with growing demand, meet our desire to focus on growth and development and intentional programming, and ensure that we can keep costs for families low and the value of programs and the care we provide high. We currently have 70 students on the wait list for after-school care. We're diligently working to find ways to affordably expand that programming to meet the growing needs in our community. As the sole provider of programming like this for our entire district, not having access to funding that could create additional spots and invest in our staff and future development would have a significant negative impact on families in the city, the town, and Westford, which could look like higher fees for licensed childcare, longer wait lists, less staff support, and fewer programming resources. From our experience, it's critical that the funds offered to provide after-school programming throughout the state have more flexible access in order to have the best outcome for children and families, which should always be our ultimate goal. Already established municipal departments, licensed providers, nonprofits, et cetera, need to be able to work collaboratively with their LEAs to best provide systems and programs to support needs within their communities. Being financially tied as subcontractors can limit this collaboration and can add barriers in a variety of ways, from the process of applying for and accessing funds in an organization like ours, especially where after school is not on the district radar because that is our network. Documentation and communication, to maintaining the integrity of our ability as the experts in our field to independently deliver high quality programming. We also believe it's critical for other entities to have access to funding to provide a variety of options for programming for children and youth, because like so many things in this state, which we've heard already today, programming and service delivery and after school looks different from one community to the next in order to best meet needs of children and families. It's critical that state supported resources come with flexibility for the varying service models that exist and allow local solutions and systems to continue to grow and flourish. The creation of a special fund to administer the Act 78 grant would keep with the intent listed in Act 78, where eligible recipients can be public, private, or nonprofit organizations, and would allow community partners like us to continue to invest in increased access to well-funded, intentionally designed, high-quality programs with staff who are well-trained, well-compensated, and exemplary role models for the youth who are the future of the state. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it. And again, if you could submit your comments, that would be wonderful. Okay.
Can I just clarify, is your funding through the municipal budget?
All of our programming for licensed childcare is in the enterprise fund, so it's all funds that come directly from the participants of our programs.
And grants. She said fees and grants, essentially.
Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you.
Kristen Dunn from Mary Johnson. I see you're on the screen. Welcome. The floor is yours.
Thank you. For the record, my name is Kristen Dunn. I'm the Executive Director of Mary Johnson Children's Center, which is a 54-year-old nonprofit organization providing care and learning to children in infancy through age 12. Because we're speaking about after school today, I'll focus on that. We serve approximately 150 children who attend kindergarten through 5th grade in our after school and summer school age programming. We're located in Addison County at the Mary Hogan Elementary School in Middlebury. Our mission is to nurture children and families of all backgrounds to strengthen belonging and well-being. I'm here to speak today on behalf of regulated providers and our ability to access funds for the development and health of after-school programs, as the legislature had originally intended in Act 78. This dedicated source of funding is specifically intended for all programs and is currently inaccessible to programs like ours. I ask that you support the creation of a special fund so that grants can be administered as intended for a mixed delivery system, the system that was built from community efforts 40 years ago to serve school-age children and their families. Our programs, as so many of you have spoken, we do so much, right? We strive to positively influence the development of children and help them thrive by providing safe and inclusive places to connect with peers, navigate friendships, engage in enrichment, and to initiate their explorations of their interests. Our programs pride themselves in not separating care from learning. We offer a safe place where kids of all backgrounds and current situations can explore their potential within a community setting. After-school programs provide Vermont families representing the diversity of our communities with peace of mind that their kids are safe and cared for when they're not able to be home with them. Programs like Mary Johnson must be able to access funding to begin new programs. There's simply no other option. A lack of funding is prohibitive. If the intention is for funding to go directly to LEAs to then be dispersed to community programs, I have some concerns. Number one, for the third space barriers that Meg mentioned earlier, I also am concerned about adding unnecessary processes and administrative burdens to an already overstretched education system. Addison Central School District came to us for this very reason. They partner with us to keep it simple. They provide us with a space to serve children for after school and summer programming. They do this, of course, for the children, but also because they want an experienced provider to create programs and to manage all that comes with starting and running and maintaining them. There's a lot of trust that comes with this, and this trust is key to our success. Everyone with children's best interests in mind should be using their time wisely rather than on unnecessary processes. We have the responsibility to remove barriers to participation in after-school programs, regardless of where and with whom the burdens land. The grassroots approach that built after-school programming in Vermont decades ago was the first indication of the strengths that can be harnessed to achieve primal goals, diversity in and of itself. I ask that you honor the voice of the people by respecting their original intentions of this bill. Create a special fund to disperse the funds. Our children cannot keep waiting. Thank you.
Thank you, Kristen. Appreciate that. Now we have Nicole.
Good morning, everyone. Nice to see you. My name is Nicole Miller. I'm the Executive Director of Vermont After School. We are a statewide nonprofit dedicated to strengthening programs, empowering youth, and expanding access to after-school and summer programs so that all Vermont youth are active, engaged, connected, and heard. Our role is to support these programs, many of whom you've heard from today, and to help them make sure that they have all the resources and professional development services that they need. We do that in partnership with the Agency of Education, the Child Development Division, Department of Health, and many others, including private grants and foundations. I have 17 years in this field as a professional, 10 of which were a 21C program director, and an additional 3 of which I served as a site coordinator at one of those sites. From my role here at Vermont After School, I have a broad view of after school and summer field, a tapestry of unique programs and providers across the state, all dedicated to supporting children, youth, families, and communities in Vermont. I'd like to take a moment to place youth at the center of the conversation. In the summer of 2022, we convened a group of young people to provide their recommendations as Vermont built this system of universal after school and summer. In the report, Youth Recommendations for the Future of After School, youth highlighted more and varied opportunities and the need for more funding to support these spaces. They also felt strongly about seeing youth voice and leadership at every level of programming design. In 2023, we conducted youth focus groups in collaboration with the United Way of Northwestern Vermont, asking those youth what would make the most impact on reducing youth substance use. The resounding message from the groups was that youth needed more activities to be involved in after school, community spaces to feel belonging, and the opportunity to experiment with and explore potential interests comfortably. They also indicated that different youth feel welcome in different spaces. We've heard a lot of different viewpoints this morning from people around the state with excellent intentions to ensure that youth are well cared for, that they have opportunities to explore their interests, to experience belonging, and to get what they need as individuals. Vermont After School wants that too. For years, we've been dreaming and working with many of you towards a universal system that works for youth and their families, and for the programs and professionals, regardless of their funding or entity types, ready to support them in every community, not one 30 miles away or 30 minutes away. Finally, with the addition of flexible state funding like this opportunity we have in front of us, it seems like the universal system might be possible to address gaps in the federal funding or where federal funding cannot. As I look ahead to the next few years, it really does seem possible to ensure that every young person in Vermont has access to affordable out-of-school time opportunities. Vermont After School believes that a special fund is important to achieve these goals. We are seeing all kinds of collaborations across the state, which is exciting and inspiring. We're also seeing a commitment from the state of Vermont to create a system that demands high quality, affordable, and equitable programs. Our understanding is that the creation of a special fund will ensure that the funds can be flexible to meet the needs that we've heard about across the state, both now and in the future. And that flexibility is what will allow for all sorts of creative partnerships to happen. We're in this moment where everyone is working together in a field across many programs, communities, schools. For the last several years, the legislature and the administration have been in partnership, positively impacting young people in Vermont. And I'm hopeful that we'll be able to continue this trend and allow all dedicated to after-school, summer, and youth work to apply directly for the funds to get youth what they need. Vermont is a nationally recognized leader in the country, earning accolades from our peers, from the National After School Association, the 50 State After School Network, and the After School Alliance. Other states have reached out to Vermont to learn more about our mixed delivery system, our focus on individualized community solutions, and cross-sector collaborations in which we take a comprehensive view of what's best for all youth, involving the work of nearly every level of government. I hope you will continue to support the continuation of the flexible mixed delivery system through the creation of this special fund. Vermont After School stands ready to work with all of you if you have additional proposals or ideas or goals through the rest of this legislative session and beyond. And I thank you for your consideration and the valuable and considerate time that you've set aside to hear from all of us this morning.
Thank you, Nicole. Appreciate that. And thank you for sending your comments in ahead of time. Monica Hutt.
Morning.
Morning. Welcome.
Thank you. So for the record, my name is Monica Hutt. I'm the Chief Prevention Officer for the state of Vermont. And I want to make sure that I'm bringing that prevention lens into this conversation a little bit.
Can you speak up a little bit?
I can, sorry. And I realize I'm going to trust that Chair Wood will keep me on track because I didn't read the 10-minute rule. So I'm going to talk really fast. So the Chief Prevention Officer role was created actually by the legislature in Act 82. And I stepped into that role in 2021 and sit in the governor's office to make sure that we are focused on prevention. Prevention for a variety of different things, everything from chronic disease to suicide prevention, but with a special focus on substance use prevention, which I'm sure we can all agree is a huge issue for the state of Vermont right now and is a huge issue for our youth. So I sit on the Substance Misuse Prevention Advisory Council, and there is a letter that I submitted in advance from that council speaking to this issue. So I'm not going to necessarily speak to that right now, but I know that you all have that, and happy to answer questions about that afterwards. I also,
sorry, is that under your name?
It should be under my name because I submitted it to both of your committee assistants, Lori.
I don't see it yet, but
it's there.
It's there? Okay. Maybe I just need to refresh again. I just refreshed a minute ago, but all right.
Thank you for the save from the corner.
All right. Thanks, Anne.
Oh God, did I not do that? But before I jump in, I want to just clarify a couple of things. I feel like this is an additive conversation, right? And a couple of folks have said this. We're talking about more opportunities, more options for kids and youth and community. And the other thing that I want to clarify, just for the record, because I feel like it got said in a couple of different ways. When we're talking about this special fund, we're not talking about drawing any dollars from the Ed Fund. We're talking about, ironically, from my position, we're ironically talking about the sales tax from cannabis sales. So for the adult market, we're using the sales tax from cannabis sales, putting them into a fund in order to fund after-school programming, after-school and summer programming for kids. It was really one of the conditions, I think, from both the governor and the legislature for the allowance for that adult use market was that we invest in both prevention and we invest in after school for our kids, because we wanted, I think, rightly so, to try to balance all of those influences. So we're talking about new dollars coming in to a special fund that would be held at the Agency of Education and would be for grants for summer and after school program that both private entities, community partners, and schools could apply for. So it's an additive conversation. Nothing's being taken away. We had the luxury of being able to talk about what we can add to this system for kids and families. So when we think about the whole conversation, it started in this very legislature with the after school report in 2021, which was really setting forth a vision for universal access for after school and summer programming for all kids in the state of Vermont, from kindergarten to the end of high school. Clearly, those programs need to be varied. They need to offer a variety of different things. But the vision was really towards that idea of after school that was universal for all. And a lot of what was in that original report was built on the Icelandic model. We talked about the Icelandic model in that report. That report talked about the Finnish model. But the Icelandic model in particular, because it's designed to reduce youth substance use, was something that this state, all of us, really focused on, because we saw even then and continue to see now the crisis that we're facing in terms of substance use and opiate use disorder in this state. And that was what really this was designed to do, to take care of kids, particularly in those 3 to 6 hours at school vacations and in summertime. So the Icelandic model is really built on this idea of the use of whole communities. So yes, things are happening in school. Yes, things are happening outside of school, because a whole community approach is how you really address what kids and families need when you're talking about the risks and dangers of substance use and substance use disorder, and the things that are available and accessible to kids that we want to try to mitigate and manage. So let's just think really quickly about what's happening in substance use for kids right now. If you look at the data from the Youth Risk Behavior Survey, the YRBS, if you look at the Vermont Youth Adult Surveys, what we see is kind of a mixed bag, right? So we see that alcohol use has gone down. We see that, unsurprisingly, cannabis use is going up. Tobacco use is going up, and there are definitely increases in use of heroin and stimulants amongst our youth population right now. So I want to make sure that we're grounded in that reality, because this isn't a future conversation. This is a right now issue that we're trying to figure out how to address. The majority of adolescents engage in substance use begin their engagement with substance use between the ages of 12 and 21, and 74% of individuals between 18 and 30 that are in treatment right now initiated their use at 17 or younger. So we are talking about something that's facing our kids right now. And this after school conversation is absolutely critical. And as I said at the very beginning, we're talking additive, we're talking more, we're trying to create more choices and more opportunities so that we don't lose any of our kids, right? Primary tenet of successful prevention strategy when you're talking about substance use disorder, when you look at prevention as an arm of public health, which it in fact is, a primary tenet includes the engagement of organizations and communities in which people feel at home and connected. What we're talking about with this special fund and with this grant program is making sure that that can happen at school and that can happen in community organizations, wherever kids are feeling that sense of connection, feeling that sense of home, feeling that sense of identity and that sameness, because that's really critical to what we're talking about here. Youth substance abuse takes community involvement and it takes strong partnerships. It's the idea of multiple trusted adults in the life of a child, a young adult, in across settings. You know, I worked in the field of disability for a very long time. And in that field, we talk about the idea of generalization, right? You need to generalize behaviors from one setting to another to really learn them. That means that the messaging about avoiding substance use, avoiding substances has to happen at school, and it has to happen in your after school program, and it has to happen at your church, and it has to happen at the drugstore. It has to happen with the neighbor next door. Kids need to hear it everywhere. And so again, we're hoping to add options, opportunities, and places for kids to hear that generalized message. You all have been tremendously supportive of the community coalitions that exist across the state of Vermont that are focused on substance use prevention. And with funding from, again, ironically, the cannabis funds, the excise tax on those funds, we've been able to really try to stabilize that network across the state of Vermont so they can focus on all substances and all ages. Those coalitions often also run after school and summer programs. I wouldn't want them to be in a position where they couldn't apply for these funds to continue that work in communities. If we eliminate options, we limit our impact on this issue. And we also are talking about access, and and you heard a couple of the, most of the individuals that you've heard testify have talked about the importance of making sure that these programs exist in every corner of the state. And that's absolutely what the intent is. Whether that's at a school or with a community organization, we need to make sure that we continue to push forward and have as many choices as possible. Right? It's funny because I was thinking about this when I think about this idea of generalization or community-based approaches and messaging. I actually harken back to some of the things that I know from education, right? We talk about multi-tiered systems of support. But before that, the acronym before that was PBS, right? It was positive. Oh, shoot, I wrote it down because I knew I was going to forget it. Positive Behavioral Supports and Strategies, PBSS, right? And that premise in education was the idea that as you built a culture for kids in school, that culture would be reinforced everywhere in the community, that you would get community organizations from the grocery store to the after-school program to the community center that would all be sending the same messages to kids. That's what that is built on, because school is reinforced by community and community is reinforced by school. So this idea of options and opportunities, I think, is just so critical. We need to be really cautious about creating any kind of geographic inequities when we're talking about equity and access, and making sure that we are hitting every corner of the state. And so whether that's a school or a community program, those are the options that we're trying to build with this grant program. And that's what the fund will achieve, is the ability for either of those organizations to step forward and offer what a community needs and wants to have. And the other thing I will say is that, we cannot expect our schools to be all things to all people all the time. There are mental health issues, there are social issues. Schools are responsible for so much. This is a partnership that we're trying to build. And I want to make sure that that's really emphasized. It's not an either or. It's not trying to diminish either entity. It's trying to build both so that kids and families have exactly what they need at the right time in the right place. I talked about the letter that you have from the SMPC, and that speaks to their support in 2021 for a mixed delivery system and their continuing support for a mixed delivery system, and the use of this fund to be available to both community partners and schools to apply for grants. I also I believe it was submitted, and now I'm cautious because.
No, I apologize. I saw that under your name. I thought it was your testimony, and I realized that it was from the committee, so.
No. But the other thing that I think submitted by maybe one of the other witnesses is an update from the field for after-school summer and third space programs. So there's a whole kind of chronology and history of all of the programming since 2021 and the first Summer Matters program that kind of walks through all of the different grants and all the different iterations and gives you a tremendous executive summary that I really encourage you to read. It's a long document. It's a pretty easy read. It's pretty interesting when you go through the history, but the executive summary really speaks to some of the outcomes, because all of these grant programs since 2021 and going into the future are heavily monitored. And we've got some really tremendous data and have achieved some really extraordinary outcomes. Additive, in addition to what's already happening in the state, the grants since 2021 increased slots for kids and youth by over 13,000 and increased days of programming by over almost 3,000, 2,651. Those are slots and days that didn't exist in the current system and wouldn't have existed without the addition of these grants, added to the work that schools were already doing. That's how you really leverage prevention efforts. You offer more, more slots, more days, more access. I mean, it's a really simple concept when you're talking about prevention and substance use. It's more. And all of that happened in all 14 of our counties. So it's a pretty extraordinary thing. I feel like we have worked so hard in state government and legislature to be focused on data and to look at outcomes. And I would hate to see us step away from something that has worked so well when we are, honing our expertise around that data and outcomes use. So that's
Thank you, Ms. Hunt. We appreciate that.
Thank you.
And will you submit your comments in writing?
It's just an outline. I'm happy to, but it's not purely written.
Whatever you feel comfortable.
Okay.
Thank you. And now we have Interim Secretary Boucher. Welcome. I was looking all around the room for you, and then Chair Conlon says she's up on the screen.
I'm on the screen. I'm on the screen. Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for the opportunity to testify today. It's a pleasure to be here virtually and see you all. For the record, my name is Heather Boucher, and I'm the Interim Secretary of Education. It's a little bit hard to go after so many folks have done a great job of basically saying a lot of the same stuff that I'm going to say, but I will try. I do want to thank the Joint Committee for really hearing voices from the field. I think that's really critical, and for me, it was very powerful to hear both from folks who are representing the school system, districts, and then also community partners. And I think it was a beautiful addition to the agenda because I think it really speaks to exactly what we're trying to do with this grant program. And I apologize, I'm on multiple devices, and so I'm looking down and making sure I cover all of my talking points for you, and I apologize for that. I do want to start by just taking a moment to step back and dwell on the intent of this program. And again, you've heard about that a lot. Not about not solely about what we're asking for in the Budget Adjustment Act, but of this program overall. So to reiterate, as has already been stated, our goal is universal after school, out of school, vacation, summer options for all Vermont students. So the whole intent around this program that we feel we have co-designed with the General Assembly in a long line of collaborative work together, as Ms. Hutt just laid out, and as have others, is really focused on what is best for our children, youth, our students. How are we actually ensuring that all students have access to opportunities that are engaging, enriching, help them improve their academics, help them learn social emotional skills, help them have fun, and all the other wonderful things that you've heard about from the variety of programs and school-based and community-based programs that you've heard today. Our conversation is the latest step in a multi-year process of building a stronger after-school system in Vermont. As I said, working toward the goal of true universal after-school. It's kind of, as an aside, I will say we have met with some national partners, the National After School organization that kind of takes a broad perspective and looks at what's happening across the nation with respect to the kinds of programs that we're talking about today. And we actually met with them, our cross-agency group met with them maybe about a year to a year and a half ago. And we were hoping that as this work started, that we would get some tips on, hey, what other states have actually built a true universal system? And they came back and said to us, no one is doing it in the way that you're trying to do, which is to really reach every geography, every corner of the state. So typically in a lot of other states, what universal means, which is very important, is that all students who are historically disadvantaged, who are historically marginalized, have access to universal after school opportunities. We're aimed at that too, but we're also taking that geographic piece in. And I think that that's really important in our highly rural state. And I just wanted to note that because I think it's another example of how we are doing things in great ways in our tiny little state because we can work together so well. We were hoping to get some pearls of wisdom from the national scene, and we were kind of like, oh, okay, I guess we're going to keep doing what we're trying to do, and they'll come back and use us as an example. So I want to make clear as well that this program is intended for schools, just as it is intended for community programs. We've heard from many witnesses today about the demonstrated track record and intent to continue offering high quality after school, either directly in the school or through community partnerships. This is wonderful and incredible to hear. And it makes me, as others have noted, very excited because that's exactly what we're trying to do with these funds. So I want to emphasize and make clear to schools, you are eligible for this grant. If you're working on expanding after school access and you're focused on a school community approach, I am sure you will be competitive. And I would say the same thing to community partners. The whole point that we're actually trying to develop is to allow the flexibility at that local level for the local partners in those areas to make the best decision about what is the best setup in terms of who's going to apply for the grant, who's going to be the fiscal agent through that application. Where the actual after school programming is going to occur. We know that space is a big issue for many buildings and areas in our state. So what I'm hearing today is that we're very close to being on the same page. And I just really want to emphasize that I feel pretty good about what I'm hearing. I will say, I am concerned by some of what we have heard before today's testimony and even from some previous witnesses that the AOE is trying to take away funding from school systems. And I will just say for the record, nothing could be further from the truth. We are merely seeking a change to language that we believe would allow us to implement the program as intended by the General Assembly. In our experience with last session and working through the years with the General Assembly, this program was always intended, as documented by the discussion and work over the past 4 years, to have multiple partners at the table, of course, with guidelines about expectations for those programs. I've also heard some references to 21C and how it is a great program with a proven record of positive outcomes for students. 100%, it is a fantastic program. And we will not be we will continue to offer 21C funds as we do. But the fact remains that we are a small state and we get what's called a small state minimum in terms of those 21C dollars. They don't stretch very far. One of the things that I will note is that during the course of this work, we did look at some 2020 data. I'm happy to share that in more depth with either of the committees if you would like. And the 21C program is wonderful and great, but there's still some inequity. And I think you heard about that even from Superintendent Tucker today about even within a particular SU or district, the 21C funds are typically not enough to actually ensure that all schools are covered by 21C funds. So we have some inequities even within a particular school district or a particular supervisory union. That is not to downplay the importance or indicate that there's something wrong with our 21C programs. Exactly the opposite. We're trying to actually supplement our federal funds with more flexible state dollars that can be used to fill in those gaps. And finally, I want to emphasize something about this program. So as you will see in my written testimony, and I will send this on afterwards, just as Ms. Hutt said, AOE really has built a grant program that's currently up for application that strongly favors both school and community partnerships and expansion of access to after school. These absolute priorities are consistent with legislative intent. And I want to make clear that AOE will be prioritizing applications that are built in partnerships of trust between schools and their community partners. It is highly unlikely that, as has been implied here this morning, a nonprofit or private partner who wants to go it alone will, quite honestly, be successful when applying for these funds. Thank you.
Thank you, Acting Secretary Boucher. Appreciate that. And the last witness today, thank you for sticking with us, Deputy Commissioner McLaughlin.
Good morning. Janet McLaughlin, I'm Deputy Commissioner within the Department for Children and Families, overseeing the Child Development Division. And I'm also a member of the After School and Summer Learning Advisory Committee that was established in Act 78. And on behalf of that committee, I do want to offer that committee's strong support for the proposed correction to the fund for the planned after school and summer learning program grants. As a state, we must support the full complement of community partners who have stepped up to meet the needs of Vermont's children and families outside of the school day in order to achieve our shared goals for equity, access, and opportunity for all children. So in my testimony, there's a few different sections based on my understanding of what some of the questions and concerns have been. So I do have a section that explains a little bit more about how the Child Development Division works with after-school programs across the state. You were hearing from folks this morning about the ways that they are blending the funding and look to both the Agency of Human Services and to Agency of Education to help them wrap around children and families with the supports they need. That's what we do every day. That's our intention. We partner together and we can continue to do that. So I have information around what the Child Development Division does. I have some information around the grant programs that have been implemented over the last several years to support summer and after school program expansions, including one specifically funded by the Child Development Division with ARPA funds. So those are, and I'm happy to answer people's questions as well. So I thought I'll start with sort of what the Child Development Division's role is specifically. So again, our mission is around affordable access to high quality childcare and child development services. We have multiple functions related to being able to provide safe, affordable, and accessible after school and summer learning programming. So first, we are regulating the safety and quality of childcare for school-aged children under 13, including those served by after-school programs, center-based childcare and preschool programs, and family childcare. There are some programs that are exempt from licensure by the Child Development Division, and those are programs that have 21C grants from the Agency of Education, and those that run less than 13 weeks per year. Though many of those programs do choose to be regulated in order to be able to access the additional funds and supports that are provided through the Child Development Division. We also help families find and pay for childcare via our regional community childcare support agencies. And they offer childcare referral services and also process childcare financial assistance program benefits. As you all know, those benefits are expanding dramatically as a result of Act 76, and that benefits our school-age programs as well. We also work to facilitate the inclusion of children with special health needs, protective service cases, and other significant family stressors through specialized childcare as part of our Children's Integrated Services work. And that can be for children up to the age of 13 or children who are 19 that have special health needs. So absolutely a critical priority for the Agency of Human Services as well. And we do have strategies and tools and resources that we put against that priority around inclusion. And these regionalized specialized childcare coordinators, they work directly with families and with programs to provide consultation, transportation, and funding opportunities through our special accommodation grants. Many programs find that's a way that they're able to get funding for a one-on-one during after school or summertime space that they don't otherwise have the resources to provide. And then we also support the strength and quality of after school and summer workforce, of the after school and summer workforce and the programs overall through grants to support professional development, program quality, and program growth. So we do try to take a comprehensive approach to being able to support our summer and after school programs. As other folks have mentioned, this has been the community-based programs and partnerships have often been the primary way that after-school programs were sort of created. Many schools are stepping into that robustly, but it's not uniform across the state. I included some information around the different license types, the number of programs, and what our licensed capacity is. So you can see that it is a significant number of children that are served through these licensed programs. I want to emphasize that these regulated programs are expected and supported to offer a program that is developmentally appropriate and non-discriminatory. It's not just a safe blank room to run around in. You offer programming within these programs, and I think that the witnesses here already spoke to that. I've highlighted some of the regulations that are actively monitored that relate to discrimination concerns, which has been consistently brought up in this discussion. So to be clear, right, you're not allowed to deny entry based on these factors that are listed. They need to provide information to families affirming that they need to be open and non-discriminatory in both their admission policies and in their practices within their programs. They need to reflect the diversity of families, cultures, and ethnicities attending the program. They need to, reflect the family composition, language and abilities of the people of the children and families engaged with the program. They need to consult with parents around what are those needs so that they can ensure that consistency and comfort and sense of belonging for those children and families as part of that program community. And then the final one I wanted to highlight was that the rule 18.66 says, under no circumstance shall the commissioner or a designee grant a variance to these rules that are associated with non-discrimination. So I'm not quite sure where the line of thinking that licensed childcare programs don't have this as a priority, that we have no enforcement mechanisms, that it's fundamentally different than the rules that apply to schools are. I'm not quite sure how that's developed, but I don't think that is true. That's not the intention, and that's not what's implemented in community programs. Let's see. So in terms of the efforts to expand summer and after-school programs, Vermont has conducted multiple grant programs designed to support the expansion of summer and after-school programs. This particular program and funding source were intended to continue that effort. And in the last year, as Monica was offering, in the last 4 years, over 32,000 children in 14 counties have been served through those efforts. Members of my team have been pleased to join our colleagues, both inside and outside of state government, to advise upon and participate in those processes to ensure that best practices related to both program quality and program access were incorporated. So we fully value, again, the diversity of programs and communities and approaches that have been taken, and through a robust and thoughtful grant-making process that is now going to be staffed with the Agency of Education. I don't see any reason for concern that the funds would be used in ways that don't align with the legislature's intention of creating safe, accessible, high-quality summer and after-school learning opportunities for children. I included some information, a little bit of information here around a specific grant program that the Child Development Division funded to expand summer and after-school opportunities for children. This was funded with American Rescue Plan funding that went through the Child Care Development Fund, so it did need to go to the regulated childcare programs. But again, that's another example of a place where through a robust grant-making process that included strong guidelines and a collaborative community review process, we were able to support a variety of different kinds of programs that are stepping up to meet the needs of the kids in their community. And so these can include grantees are community-based nonprofits. Sometimes they're the large multi-service agency that's wrapping around kids in lots of different ways. Sometimes there are those that have a specialty with serving it might be a nonprofit dedicated to the arts or the environment, and then their after-school and summer programming is one piece of it. And sometimes they are those focused on serving a specific population, like youth from refugee and immigrant families. They've included municipalities, typically libraries or parks and recreation department that I already heard from, small businesses, both family childcare homes and center-based programs, school districts, and school-affiliated nonprofits. So absolutely, the school district-led programs are a core part of the mix, and they're a part of the partners for the Child Development Division, in addition to Agency of Education. I want to flag that for that grant process, as well as for in the proposal that's been, or in the RFP that's out right now, we do ask that all grantees, they need to positively affirm that they would not discriminate in admission, employment, or administration of its programs or activities on the basis of race, color, national origin, sex, handicap, disability, age, sexual orientation, gender identity, religion, creed, ancestry, belief, veteran status, or genetic information. And so programs that do that seem very unlikely to rise through this competitive application process and be able to be supported. And so in conclusion, I just want to offer that I think also Vermont families value and seek out after school and summer opportunities from a variety of community partners. The mix of programs and partners varies by community capacity, local leadership, and the resources available. That's why we're hearing about different things happening in different communities. In some communities, the schools are in the best position to grow. In others, it could be the town, a nonprofit, or a trusted childcare program. And for some families, they're going to seek out that school-led program, while others may specifically need or seek out an alternative for their children. And so to truly meet the needs of Vermont families and the legislative intent of Act 76, it's imperative that the after-school and summer learning program grants be available to the full complement of entities committed to serving Vermont's children in the summer and after school.
Thank you. Appreciate you being here. Okay, we have some time for questions. Gonna look to committee members here first. Representative Conlon, you want to go first?
I will, but then we did choose the Ed committee first last time, so you want to move on to.
I'll look to my right.
I just have a question about various sources of funding. Both of you spoke about 32,000 kids in 14 counties benefiting from a grant program. That's not this money, that's some other money. And also the topic that Representative Toof brought up about the new funding for childcare, which, as you said, says after school in the bill numerous times. So could you kind of orient us money-wise?
Yes, and you want to, well.
And I would actually also ask, Interim Secretary Boucher to step in.
Yes.
I mean, the very short answer without a lot of specificity is that there were various funding sources that started in 2021 that we cobbled together to create the model for the grant program. So there were, I believe, some state dollars. I know that there were federal relief dollars coming in that we utilized. But
and it was tobacco settlement money.
It was tobacco settlement money as well. Again, irony's all over the place for me. But the intent is to use all that we've learned over those 2 or 3 different grant cycles with about 7 different iterations of granting to build what will go forward with specifically the cannabis sales tax revenue dollars. So lots of different things came together, and again, probably Secretary Boucher can be way more specific than I can about all the different sources of funding. But we use them to model the best approach.
Thanks, I appreciate that. So that was what might be considered temporary money? Or kind of one-time dollars?
Yes.
Yes.
Great. And then, so how about the new infusion of money from the child care dollars that are flowing in, and specifically the relationship to after-school programs?
So we have, let's see. So the grants that have been given in the past have been around expansion, not necessarily about ongoing operation of the programs. And so the money that is coming in through Act 76 is largely to support, ongoing operation of affordable and sustainable quality programs for children. And so through, and the main vehicle that's being used is the Child Care Financial Assistance Program, right? So that programs that can use, families can apply for Child Care Financial Assistance, and they can use that to be able to participate in the licensed childcare program of their choice. And so that, again, the amount of money paid to the programs was increased, the income eligibility was increased. And so we do anticipate that is going to lead to a much incent growth within, the hope is that will incent growth within after school and summer programs as well. And will make that more affordable for families. But again, so that's one of those funding streams that allows for ongoing, that's designed to be sustainable. Similar to how, again, 21C program, that can be some ongoing source of funds. But again, as Interim Secretary Boucher was saying, it's not enough to serve, every child who needs a quality summer and after school opportunities.
Thank you. I'm going to look over to Human Services for any questions. Representative Whitman, go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have a question for Chief Production Officer. And I guess you mentioned within some of our substance use prevention work, looking at prevention coalitions, that we funded $3 million for the last couple of years. And you mentioned that some of them provide after school programming. And I was just wondering, as we think about the comparison between sort of like after school programs, which you might think of like direct services almost in the effort of prevention, right? Versus all the other activities that prevention coalitions do. Can you just describe some of that and how do we kind of like compare the work and the outcomes of those two facets?
That's a great question.
I do that all the time.
So the prevention coalitions exist across the state, and part of the use of the $3 million that comes through the excise tax dollars, which is not quite there yet, so we're still in a transitory space in terms of actually funding them, was meant to really stabilize them as a network, right? So we're using different fiscal intermediaries to try to build a really cohesive network of those coalitions across the state of Vermont and enable them to focus on all ages and all substances, because up until now, they've been very beholden to whatever federal funds were coming in. So yeah, focus on tobacco, yes. Focus on methamphetamines, yes. Focus on opiates. They were really dependent on whatever federal dollars were available. And there were very few state dollars sort of designed to sustain their operations. And they're typically 1 or 2 man shops as well. And so they were spending most of their time applying for grants and trying to just keep the lights on, literally, in these tiny little coalitions. So the dollars from the excise tax money from the cannabis sales, cannabis revenue, was designed to stabilize that. In addition, and so they do a lot of work in terms of education, community building, coalition building. So they're working with their schools, they're working in communities, they're providing education, they're providing information. They're working with municipalities that are looking to adjust how cannabis retail shops are laying out. They're really kind of comprehensive in their work around substance use disorder and substance addiction. Additionally, oftentimes, not all of them, but some of them will apply for grants to run very specific after-school programs, whether those are direct service 5 days a week, or whether those are once a week or on weekends, or team meetings in the evenings. They could potentially use these after-school dollars to create additional programming to support kids in their communities in whatever way made the most sense. Again, based on what communities need, what communities are voicing as preference and priority, which I think is the power of those really local coalitions. They can respond to what's happening in the immediate vicinity versus being, connected to just a static kind of approach or. Does that answer your question? Sure.
Other questions, Representative Garofano?
Thank you. Thank you all for being here and sharing good story information. Deputy Commissioner McLaughlin, can you talk a little bit more about the monitoring process? You said that the regulated programs are actively monitored. Can you explain what that process looks like and for specifically after school program?
Yeah, so regulated after school programs are included in our childcare licensing process. So that does include a lot of support when programs are getting started to make sure there's, their facilities and spaces are safe. And then it includes regular unannounced visits to the programs. We have a licensing team, I think maybe 25 people or so that are licensors that are working directly with programs. And they are going out and, again, doing these unannounced visits to programs every single year, looking at all the regulations. And in addition, any, parents or staff or anyone can bring a concern about a program to the licensing unit, and they would, very quickly conduct investigations of any concerns, and are able to, issue violations, identify corrective action plans, so that we can make sure that programs are operating, as intended with support from the state.
Yes, just double check. All set there? Go ahead, Representative.
Just a follow-up question to that. The licensing division can go out and give violations. What further steps can be taken? Can they, if eventually be shut down a program if they're not complying with
Yes.
regulations?
Yep. There's a process, right, of issuing the violations, either, corrective action and appeal process. But yeah, absolutely. We can shut down programs, and we do if there's an issues related to, children's physical safety.
Okay.
Thank you. Representative Stone, and then we're along that line. Yes, all the way around. And I have some of my own.
Oh, yeah, I have a lot, so I'll try to wrap it up.
It's okay.
Heather, I don't know if she's still with us, was on the after school task force. And I know that report came out in 2021, but that was before Carson v. Macon came out. And so I think it's important we recognize that. Janet, how many licensed sites through GCF and CDD are located at private religious schools? And then can you assure that those sites are, would accept LGBTQI students?
So I can't give you that specific number off the top of my head. I'm not sure we categorize it that way in our data, so it would probably have to be an individual review. However, we do, programs are required to have, in their policies and their handbooks, which our licensors do look at, affirmations of the fact that they are non-discriminatory and they are and have are welcome and are welcoming to all families. So that, and again, that's something that we do actively monitor. I did just check with my licensing team, and we, in the last 3 years, it sounds like we've had maybe 4 or 5 concerns that have been brought to us, and the programs change their policies. So it's not a. I'm not going to say everything is perfect, but it's also not it doesn't appear to be some dramatic overbearing, overarching issue and pattern amongst all regulated childcare that thus we need to totally change, a big structure.
Active litigation about it, and there are ones that have applied that don't have everything included in those discrimination policies. So I just wanted to raise that as a concern, the elephant in the room we're not talking about. Thank you.
Actually, Representative Stone, I think we are talking about it. Why don't we go around the table here, and then we'll have Representative McCann on screen. So Representative Williams.
Thank you. A question and then a concern. The question is on staffing at the AOE. I know in the past there have been concerns about having positions in all the right places. Do you feel at this time that it is something that can happen at the agency?
Yes, well, this committee itself, I believe, led the efforts to give the agency 2 new full-time positions for this work last session. So we're going to start with that. So we have 1 full-time position that will be in charge of running the grants program with in partnership with the rest of our team for after school and out of school programs such as Community Schools 21C. And we also have a data FTE, full-time FTE that will be really doing the work to continue to monitor on the data side what the results are for the program to ensure that we are seeing progress in terms of the outcomes that we've outlined today. So we're going to start there. There's no guarantee that we would not come back in the future and say we need more staffing, but we feel pretty comfortable with the 2 new staff members right now.
Thank you. And the concern I have as a representative of the eastern side of the Northeast Kingdom are grants. Grants are hard to apply for, as I mentioned many times, and you all know the challenges of getting one taken care of. Whoever writes the grants, please make them fast and simple and accessible so that we get equal opportunity to use them. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Representative Williams. If I may follow up, one thing that I don't think has been discussed really in our conversations yet is our broader plan for this program will be to leverage resources so that we actually are helping communities such as those in the Northeast Kingdom, such as those in Caledonia County that Superintendent Tucker spoke about, because we realize that there are capacity challenges. And so the sustainable long-term goal is that we're going to be bringing some resources to bear through the advisory group, through these funds, to actually help our most needy in terms of universal after-school access, to really build up those programs. It's not something we've been able to focus on out of the gate because we really need to start this program, but it's definitely something on our mind, and it's part of our short to medium plan in terms of how we're actually going to help build capacity. So the long-term plan is not, here's the grants, take it and go, go have, it's all on you. Like, we really want to build support from the state to actually help in those grant application, but also building that kind of core infrastructure at the regional and local level piece.
Thank you very much.
Representative Buss, did you have a question?
I did.
Okay,
thank you. So as I used to run a childcare program, and I think this might be for Secretary Boucher because it would, interim secretary, we were able to frequently apply for many grant funds. And I did notice that in the RFP that you are supposed to detail out if you have any other funds available that might be for the same use. But what kind of oversight is there of the looking at when there might be a duplication of funds? And then the other question is for our private providers that are not regulated, how does that oversight work? Because if you're regulated, then you drop in on us unannounced, which is terrifying, but we have to do it. But if you're not regulated, then how do we have oversight of those programs and then our taxpayer dollars?
Yeah, so I think it's a great question, and I think it also has more to do with the monitoring component. And so what we'll rely on this first year is largely reporting back as we build this team, as I've said, but we will move into similar elements that you've heard about that occur with CDD. So, which we do in 21C programs, we do in our community schools, granted programs that we've run through ESSER. So we will do very similar types of monitoring as what you've already heard from that occurs in CDD and is already happening in AOE. So I think we just need a bit of time to kind of get up to that. We're trying to launch the grant, and we'll then, in year 2 be focusing on much more. Like, the first year is going to be sort of heavy reporting back, and then we're going to actually be focusing on the active monitoring. And this will be a reimbursement system like all of our state dollars are. So there have to be receipts and evidence and all that kind of stuff, like for making sure that there's not, I guess the implication would be that there's not some kind of fraudulent double dipping or things like that. So we do have built in through our approved state grant plan, we do have elements that are able to hold accountable nonprofits. And we've already done that with some of our ESSER grants. For instance, we had a run of programs, both nonprofit and LEAs that were funded under Act 112 for mental health supports. So this is, I will not, this is a relatively new model for the Agency of Ed, but we've had success and we feel very comfortable to be able to do this. The other thing I would say, it's because we have such tight connections with partners like CDD and other agencies who they're very used to working in this space. They're not used to working with LEAs, so we can help them in that capacity. It's a back and forth.
A duplication of private providers? I mean, private foundations that might also give money to the same purpose? So I understand that you have to present receipts, but what stops you from getting a receipt from, the Couch Foundation and through someone else? Do you know what I mean?
Right. So when we have our fiscal monitoring on site, we would be looking for accounting and how they're actually, in their books, how they're actually accounting for different expenses. So that's what we do as part of our federal accounting, federal monitoring under federal requirements. We would be adapting that kind of an approach, regardless of who the status of the entity is. So whether they're private or public, really they're signing on to allow the state to actually look into their books that way when they're actually signing on for a grant and agreeing to it.
Thank you. Representative Austin.
Thank you. I just want to get some clarification on this request for the cannabis money to go to a special fund and the AOE. So I'm assuming are you still using ESSER funds to fund these two? No. Okay. So there's a funding stream for you to implement and oversee the after-school program. Is that correct?
Let me explain. Sure. This is a great question, and I'm happy to have the opportunity to explain from our perspective what the challenge is. So in our mind, from the administration's perspective, in partnership with the General Assembly, the intent of this grant was to be able to have applicants from LEAs as applicants, nonprofits, community partners, et cetera, all to be on, if you will, equal footing to be able to apply to these funds, which is why we had assumed, I think, that it would be a special fund of some sort, or it would be general fund, or it would be something of that nature, because it would have, we assumed it would have the flexibility for any and all applicants to be able to apply. So we were surprised when we learned that the funds had actually been sort of automatically put into the Ed Fund, because the Ed Fund can only directly be allocated to LEAs. It can't even, without statutory change, be directly allocated for the Agency of Ed to use. So I think part of the challenge is, like, we keep hearing, right, that like, well, the Ed Fund can be used for LEAs to contract with other entities. True, we're not arguing that, but we actually want the most flexibility at that local level, because there might be some LEAs that don't have the capacity to actually take this on. And I think you've heard some examples of that. So the piece that's actually allocated out of the funds to, my understanding is the piece that's allocated out of the funds for the staffing of the agency has a separate like a separate line. It doesn't go to the Ed Fund. So that goes, it's allocated directly to the agency. And so the staffing is fine, is taken care of. It's really our hope and our strong desire, and we think we've, hopefully tried to explain why today, is that we actually have a special fund so that all applicants can apply. There are not unique restrictions as there are in the education fund.
Great, thank you for that clarification. And just ballpark figure, what is the cost for, let's say, administration of this program, roughly?
Sure. Sure, thank you. So we were actually allocated a total of $500,000, but that is certainly way more than we need for 2 positions. We probably need about half of that for 2 positions. But again, those funds are for us to do that capacity building region by region, to really provide resources to hopefully help with transportation challenges in some regions. And so really that's what we're hoping to leverage the bulk of those dollars for.
Thank you. Thank you. Representative Meunier.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Right, so we're coming up on hour 3. We've heard a whole lot today, and I also want to thank all the presenters. But so to get to my question, I have to briefly check my understanding, which is we're already doing mixed delivery. This money is meant for mixed delivery. There's no way to get to scale without doing mixed delivery. And I think the whole committee is in favor of mixed delivery. So that's not a question. It's also my understanding that wherever this money is parked and however it flows, if it's under the ed fund and it flows through LEAs, it's still the case, I think, that anybody can apply for it. And so my question is, I've heard the concern that either our ability to expand is going to be limited, or the people who can apply for the money is going to be they're going to be limited in their ability to do so. And so I guess the question is, how would parking the money in the AOE limit either expansion or the ability of people to apply? And that's for anybody. You have to be sitting there.
Yeah, we mean park it in the ed fund.
Yes, thank you.
So not everyone can apply if it's in the ed fund. The ed fund can only be allocated to LEAs. So the state holds the ed fund, like we hold it as kind of trying to think of how to explain this in plain English. Like we hold it on behalf of the LEAs, anything to do with the with the ed fund. And so I think you've heard some pretty eloquent testimony today about why that would actually stymie work at the local level, because if everything has to flow at a fiscal level through the LEAs, it doesn't allow the other community partners to actually have equivalent decision-making, to actually be fully part of that building of that tapestry at the local level.
Still don't understand what we would be limited. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I want to be clear though. So for instance, Heather Moore's program can't be allocated the fund. I think, Heather, you're not a school-based program. Is that correct?
Well, I'm here kind of on behalf of 2, but the youth center, would be funded and overseen by the community, by the municipality, which was designed strategically so that the community could have a deeper connection and involvement in structure of that space, and so that this youth could have a community-based space, not a school-based space. Based on if the funds come from the education fund, the municipality would then have to request that to the school board, that the school board be the fiscal agent, and therefore the school would then have the responsibility of using school staff to monitor all of the funding structures for this grant and pursue all the payments and have all the liabilities and all of that administrative burden that is a project that's supposed to be the community's project. Whereas we already have a 21C program, we're already doing a lot of like our after school and out of school time stuff with our youth. We're working on looking into expansions ourselves, but the school would then have to do both of that work to do a youth center in the communities that I'm working in.
So in essence, we're trying to keep this as flexible as possible, because an LEA certainly can, and we expect will apply for these funds as well. So in an example like Heather's, I would assume when new grant opportunities are coming up, you're sort of partnering together and figuring out who's going to be the fiscal agent for this pot of money, who's going to be the fiscal agent for this, where are we meeting in the middle? So that's all we're trying to continue, because the state dollars that we have to bring to bear out of the cannabis revenue doesn't have the restrictions that 21C federal dollars do, that CFAP federal dollars do. So it really is meant from our perspective to be a flexible pot of money that can be used to really best leverage those local decision making, which we would argue needs to have equal footing among potential community partners.
Thank you, thank you. Just a moment, just a moment, please. I'm just gonna remind folks that we have till noon, so I'm gonna ask the respondents to be as concise in their response as possible. That would be great. And Representative Brady, you're up next.
Thank you. I just want to note, I've asked AOE staff more than once since the session started here for specific examples of programs that won't be able to access the funds. Again, they might have to access them through an LEA, but that would not be able to access them unless it's through a special fund, and I've yet to get a response on that. But I want to start by expressing my appreciation for those who've said the focus is on the kids. Any insinuation that it's about that for anybody else, I think is off base. But this is not a discussion about individual programs. This is a discussion today for us about how we take precious public dollars and make sure we fund strong, stable, accessible programs that are accessible to all kids. And I will say I'm really kind of stunned sitting here today that there's so much interest from the administration. There's been more members of the administration in this room in the last 3 hours than there have been in the last 3 years I've been here. On a very small amount of money, relatively speaking, taking a relatively small amount of money out of the education fund and making it available to programs that can apply for grants. Well, we have a $2+ billion education fund with a $250 million hole in it. And at this very moment, school boards and schools are operating in chaos. We may be looking at massive teacher layoffs. We have tax rates through the roof. Like, we desperately need to be working towards a more coherent system that operates at scale. And yet we're spending so much on this small, what quite frankly feels like a fight at this point, devoid of the context of the larger education issues and funding issues that exist right now and the leadership that we need. So my questions are,
I was wondering where they
if we are going to disperse grants to, these are questions for Secretary Boucher, to many small programs, do we run the risk of losing more public funds to overhead in that process of dispersing them farther than if we're operating programs more at scale through schools or schools through private providers? Is there a risk of more cost and public dollars going to overhead? That would be my first question. And my second question is, we heard really compelling testimony about 21C. I think we know the history of 21C and that there's more need than we can meet with our funds that we currently get in Vermont for that. So could these funds be used towards those, the existing needs and opportunity to expand 21C?
So first of all, yes, they absolutely could be. That's part of a flexible model. They could certainly be used to supplement and expand 21C programming. I think it would be, we would need to provide some technical assistance potentially to the field, which we would be happy to do, because the funds flowing in from 21C would have more restrictions in terms of reporting and those kinds of pieces than the cannabis revenue funds would. But it's certainly meant that these funds are meant to, these state cannabis funds are meant to expand and extend current programming or build new programming. I think we're just going to have to agree to disagree on this notion that this money is being taken away from the ed fund. Again, I will state it is our opinion, based on going through the legislative session with this committee last year, that this was always meant to be a mixed delivery system with applicants on equal footing. There was never a discussion that I recall, and I actually testified multiple times on this, that this would be an ed fund funded program that would then flow through at a fiscal level LEAs. We're just going to have to agree to disagree on that. I really reject the notion that we're stripping money out of the ed fund. If that is how this came out, I think that was a mistake from our perspective.
Okay, Representative McCann, you've been very patiently waiting.
Can you hear me okay?
Yes. Yes.
All right. At first, this is going to sound more like a comment than a question, but I do worry that when we talk about competing for funding between municipalities / communities and schools, that we're missing the point, that those should act as one body. We should be, our municipalities should be surrounded by what's going on in the schools and vice versa, especially as we continue to put so much energy into community schools and bringing resources to the schools that are necessary for our students and our families within those municipalities. I guess my question really is on, are we putting extra pressure on LEAs by having them funneling the money out? And if we're not, if what we're hearing is that we're not, I just wonder why, going back to what Representative Minier was saying, we've got a system that is already mixed delivery. It's not broken. Everybody has a chance. And I'm hearing pushback that everybody doesn't have a chance. But if you're partnering with your school, then the school is going to provide you that opportunity to be a part of this. So I guess I'm not sure where the breakdown is.
Representative McCann, is your, could you restate your question?
Yes, I guess I'm gonna switch how I ask this, and I'm wondering about how we track the students that go through the programs if they're not in partnership with the schools. How do we track the 504 plans, the IEP plans, anything that has to do with special ed if we're going to separate those programs from the schools?
Go ahead. Acting Secretary, I was trying to think of the word. Yes.
You can just say Heather, that's fine. So,
thank you, Heather.
Yeah, so the second question in my mind was quite different than the first. But the second question I would say, so in the existing mixed delivery system, unless it's a school-based program, IDEA and the education federal legislation doesn't really apply. So I think that's really important. There's no federal requirement that if you're engaged in a program at a rec center that your IEP plan extends to that. I think one of the nice things that we saw in the Summer Matters program and in the subsequent work we've done in the past few years is a lot of really good thinking, again, at that local level to actually build some continuity, even if it wasn't required for students to best accommodate them. And as I think Janet and perhaps both Monica said, we built that focus on, look, you really need to serve all kids, including kids with disabilities, to access these grants. I think that really was well received by the field. The other piece I would say, again, on this notion of why not all of it go, why not schools be the sole fiscal agent, is there might be communities where the school just doesn't have the capacity, or they decide not to. They've got a lot of other things going on, so they don't have the capacity to actually take on this grant. And we would say that that's actually unfair to that community if there's another entity that actually could partner with the school and actually act as the fiscal agent. At the Agency of Ed, we've moved definitely away from having schools function as fiscal agents on behalf of another program. We could bring Cassandra Ryan in and talk with you about how that's a really risky proposition in terms of basic accounting. It leaves the LEAs, the districts, open to significant risk.
Thank you. Okay, we have about 2 minutes, and I haven't had a chance to ask my questions yet, but go ahead. We have a representative from Appropriations here.
Yeah, for the record, Mahala, this is a question for the providers who testified. That there are various.
Can you be a little more specific, Representative Mahaly, in terms of our specific provider here, or?
No, generally the providers who just testified. You all talk about how you work in coordination with or have the support of or the LEA, your LEA. If you had to ask the LEA for support for your application to a fund, would you get that support?
Let's start with Heather first, and then we'll move to Deb, who's also had her hand up previously.
I could say I'm not entirely sure that the school districts would act as the fiscal agent for a community project.
Would what?
I'm not sure that the school districts would act as a fiscal agent for a
I'm
community-based.
asking, I'm assuming you could apply directly as the administration was proposing. And I'm just asking that if you asked for their support, would you get it?
Oh, support, absolutely. Yes, support as partners, but not as fiscal agent.
So if that were a required piece, you would get that support.
We would definitely get support, absolutely.
Okay, and Deb, losing my voice.
Thank you so much. In response to your question, we have such an incredible mutual respect between the program that we run and our school. We've continuously had MOUs throughout our relationship with them that are specific for leveraging and sharing resources. So we're fiscally actually saving money. We're able to extend services and implement innovative programs that they just do not have the capacity to do. So those kids who are falling through the crack, who represent the highest rate of kids who are impacted by the current opioid epidemics, there's so much shame and stigma attached to that, that they do not show up in these programs typically. They show up in community-based programs that are more equipped with trauma-transformed programming, that have the space for innovation. We have a peer-based youth mental health program, 3-year grant researching that, creating a national model because we're not connected to a school. And just in terms of oversight, I would have to say most of us are all connected to nonprofits. We have fiscal agents, and we have to adhere to HIPAA. We have to adhere to all of their policies related to equity and accessibility and the fiduciary responsibilities.
Thank you, Deb. Thank you. Okay, we are at time, a little bit over, but I am just gonna, I just have a couple of questions. I appreciate everybody's patience today. Both Chair Conlon and I appreciate everyone's participation today. And I know that it's been a learning experience for all of us. I wanted to follow up because this is a question that I'm not sure was fully answered, and this is for you, Janet. So when the oversight is done of the private programs after school, any folks receiving that, as Tesha said, you know, those surprise visits. Are you reviewing the policies that they have on site to ensure that they conform in all aspects of what's required?
So when programs get started, we do that and do that really detailed look at their handbook. And then we are doing sort of spot checks on at different programs on different elements because so it's not, I can get back with the licensing team on exactly what specific pieces they look at each time.
So you do look at their full handbook when they're being initiated, and then on review, it's a spot check. Is that what I'm hearing you say?
Yeah, we don't, when we go out and do a licensing visit, we sort of have a checklist of ones that we're making sure we absolutely are checking off on. And we have others that we are observing and that we're sort of observing as we go. But looking at the handbook is something I think we do we do each time, but so
that's my question, whether you're reviewing that each time to see if there's been any change from the previous time, et cetera. Okay, I just wanted to make sure that non-discrimination piece was covered. So I just want to extend my personal thanks to everybody participating, both committees and all of the witnesses that we've had here today.
Absolutely. It's been a long session, but very informative, and everybody's patience is greatly appreciated.